Hello friends. Did you know nearly 80% of those who watch my videos aren't subscribed? If you enjoy these stories, please hit that subscribe button and leave a like. It really helps. Thank you for being here. By the way, where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments. I've been hauling timber through the Pacific Northwest for close to 11 years now, and I can tell you that the Cascade Range doesn't care how experienced you think you are. The mountains have a way of humbling you. Sharp switchbacks, sudden weather changes, logging roads that appear on no map, these are daily realities for drivers like me. My name is Abner Kincaid, and what happened to me in the fall of 2019 taught me that the most dangerous cargo isn't the one that shifts in transit. It's the one that was never supposed to be on your manifest in the first place. I was working for a mid-sized hauling company called Rainier Freight Solutions out of Tacoma. We specialized in moving raw timber from independent mills scattered throughout the Cascades down to the larger processing plants near the I-5 corridor. The pay was decent, the routes were predictable, and the company didn't micromanage as long as you met your delivery windows. I'd been running the same circuit for 3 years. Pick up at a mill outside of Concrete, Washington, haul south through the Mount Baker Snoqualmie National Forest, hit the way station just past Darrington, then continue down to a processing facility in Everett. Twice a week, sometimes 3 times if they needed extra runs during peak season. The route took me through some of the most beautiful country you'll ever see, all Douglas fir and western red cedar, mist clinging to the ridgelines like something out of a painting. But beauty up here comes with a price. The logging roads are narrow, barely maintained, and during certain times of year you're sharing them with active timber operations. I'd had close calls with fallen trees, washouts after heavy rain, even a black bear that refused to move off the road for a solid 20 minutes. You learn to expect the unexpected. That Tuesday started like any other. I rolled into the mill around 4 in the morning, the sky still pitch black and the temperature hovering just above freezing. The mill was a small operation, maybe 15 employees total, tucked into a clearing surrounded by second-growth forest. The owner had retired and sold it to a management group a year prior, and ever since then the place had been running lean. Fewer workers, longer hours, corners cut wherever possible to keep margins tight. I didn't love it, but it wasn't my business to question how they ran things. My job was to show up, load the timber, verify the paperwork, and get it to Everett before the afternoon shift started processing. The foreman on duty that morning was a woman named Sina Darrow. She was relatively new to the mill, maybe 6 months in, and she ran a tight ship. Sina was in her early 40s, short and stocky, with graying blonde hair usually pulled back in a ponytail. She had a habit of chewing on toothpicks and squinting at you like she was trying to figure out if you were lying. I'd interacted with her maybe a dozen times before this, always brief exchanges. She'd hand me the load manifest, I'd verify the pallet count, we'd both sign off, and I'd be on my way. She wasn't unfriendly, just business-focused. That morning, she seemed a little more tense than usual. I backed my flatbed into the loading zone and killed the engine. The mill was already buzzing with activity, forklifts moving pallets of finished lumber, the high-pitched whine of saws cutting through the early morning stillness. I grabbed my clipboard and thermos of coffee and headed toward the office, a prefab trailer with peeling paint and a crooked wooden sign that read, "Mill Office, no unauthorized entry." Sina was standing outside, smoking a cigarette and tapping her boot against the metal steps. She looked up as I approached, exhaled a plume of smoke, and nodded. "Kincaid," she said, her voice flat. "You're early." I shrugged. Traffic was light. Figured I'd get here and get loaded before the sun comes up. She took another drag, then flicked the cigarette into a puddle. "Load's already staged. Should be straightforward. I need you out of here in 90 minutes, though. We've got another truck coming in at 6 and I can't have you blocking the bay." 90 minutes was tight, but doable. I nodded and followed her into the office, where she handed me the manifest. The paperwork looked standard. 240 board feet of Douglas fir, cut to spec, bundled and strapped on 8 pallets. The destination was listed as Everett Processing Plant Number 3, delivery window between 10 a.m. and noon. I scanned the numbers, cross-checked the pallet IDs, and signed at the bottom. Signe countered, then tucked her copy into a filing cabinet. "Anything I should know about this load?" I asked, more out of habit than genuine concern. She shook her head. "Nope, standard run. Just make sure you hit the weigh station. Leif's been on everyone's ass lately about overweight trucks." Leif Halverson was the senior inspector at the Darrington Weigh Station, a granite-faced guy in his mid-50s who took his job very seriously. He'd been there for over 20 years and had a reputation for catching violations that other inspectors missed. If your paperwork was off by even a decimal point, Leif would find it. Most drivers hated dealing with him, but I'd always managed to stay on his good side by keeping my loads clean and my documentation airtight. I'd only been flagged once in 3 years, and that was for a worn brake light. "I'm always clean," I said. "Never had an issue with Leif." Sina gave me a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Good, keep it that way." I walked back out to the loading zone and watched as the crew finished strapping the pallets onto my flatbed. Everything looked solid. Tight straps, evenly distributed weight, tarps secured against the rain that was starting to spit down from the low clouds. I did my own visual inspection, tugging on the straps and checking the corner tie-downs. Satisfied, I climbed into the cab, fired up the engine, and rolled out of the mill just as the first hints of dawn started to gray the eastern sky. The logging road leading away from the mill was a winding, potholed stretch of gravel and mud. I took it slow, keeping the semi in second gear as I navigated the tight curves. The rain picked up, turning the windshield into a smeared mess that the wipers could barely keep up with. Visibility dropped to maybe 50 feet. I flicked on my fog lights and leaned forward, gripping the wheel tight. This was the part of the job I hated most, driving blind through unfamiliar terrain, trusting that the road wouldn't collapse or that a fallen tree wouldn't block my path. After about 20 minutes, the logging road merged onto a slightly better Forest Service road. Still unpaved, but at least wider and better maintained. I picked up speed, pushing the semi to a steady 30 miles per hour. The forest closed in on both sides, dense and dark, the trees so tall and tightly packed that almost no light penetrated the canopy. It felt like driving through a tunnel. The way station was about 45 minutes away, and I settled into the rhythm of the drive. My mind wandered. I thought about the mortgage payment I needed to make, the dentist appointment I'd been putting off, whether I'd have time to grab breakfast before the delivery. Mundane stuff. I didn't think about the load. Why would I? It was just timber. Certified, inspected, loaded by professionals. There was no reason to suspect anything was wrong. But looking back now, I realize that's exactly when things start to go sideways. When you're comfortable, when you're not paying attention, when you assume everything is routine. The rain had let up by the time I hit the paved section of Highway 5 and 30, but the road was still slick. I merged into the right lane and checked my mirrors. No one behind me, no one ahead. Just me and the empty highway. A few miles later, I saw the familiar green sign. Way Station 1 mile. All commercial vehicles must stop. I flicked on my turn signal, even though there was no one around to see it, and started slowing down. The way station sat in a cleared lot just off the highway, a low concrete building with a covered scale platform and a small office with tinted windows. A flagpole out front flew the Washington state flag, snapping in the wind. I rolled onto the scale and waited, engine idling. The digital readout on the pole ticked upward as the scale calibrated, then settled on a number, 68,400 pounds, well within legal limits. I was about to shift into gear and roll off when the office door opened and Leif Halverson stepped out. He was wearing his usual uniform, dark green Department of Transportation jacket, black pants, steel-toed boots. His hair was buzzed short, streaked with gray, and his face had the weathered look of someone who'd spent decades outdoors. He waved me over to the side of the scale platform, and I pulled forward into the inspection lane. I rolled down my window as he approached, clipboard in hand. "Morning, Leif," I said, trying to sound casual. He didn't return the greeting. "Kincaid, kill the engine and step out, please." That wasn't standard. Usually, Leif would just check the weight, glance at my paperwork, and wave me through. Asking me to step out meant he was doing a full inspection, which could take anywhere from 15 minutes to an hour depending on how thorough he wanted to be. I swallowed my irritation and complied, shutting off the engine and climbing down from the cab. "Something wrong?" I asked. Leif didn't answer right away. He walked around the front of the truck, running his hand along the hood, then moved to the flatbed. He inspected the straps, checked the tarps, and peered closely at the pallet IDs stenciled on the wood. He pulled out a small flashlight and shone it between the bundles, looking for I didn't know what. After a few minutes, he straightened up and looked at me. "Your paperwork says 240 board feet, 8 pallets. That match what you loaded?" I nodded. "Yeah, loaded it myself. Watched the crew strap it down. Everything's accounted for." Leif's eyes narrowed. "When did you pick this up?" "This morning, around 4:30. "From the mill outside Concrete?" "Yeah, same place I always pick up from." He made a note on his clipboard. "Who signed off on the load?" "Signa Darrow. She's the foreman." Leif's expression didn't change, but I noticed his jaw tighten slightly. He walked back to his office without another word, leaving me standing in the cold drizzle. I shoved my hands in my pockets and waited, watching as he disappeared inside. Through the tinted window, I could see him making a phone call. My stomach started to churn. Something was off. Leif had inspected my loads dozens of times over the years, and he'd never acted like this. He was usually efficient, professional, even friendly in a gruff sort of way. This felt different. This felt like he suspected something. But what? The load was clean. I'd verified the count myself. The paperwork matched. There was no reason for him to be suspicious unless something was wrong with the load itself, something I hadn't noticed. After what felt like an eternity, Leif emerged from the office. He walked over to me, his face unreadable. "I'm going to need you to unstrap one of those pallets," he said. "I want to inspect the wood." I blinked. "Inspect it?" "Leif, it's just timber. It's all certified, tagged, loaded by the mill. What's there to inspect? Just do it, Kincaid." His tone left no room for argument. I grabbed my gloves from the cab and climbed onto the flatbed. The rain had started up again, a light mist that made everything slippery. I carefully unhooked the straps on the rearmost pallet, the one closest to the cab, and peeled back the tarp. The wood looked fine, straight, clean cuts, bundled tightly with steel bands. I didn't see anything unusual. Leif climbed up beside me, his boots clanging on the metal bed. He crouched down and ran his hand along the edge of one of the boards, then pulled out a small knife and scraped at the surface. A few splinters came loose, revealing a faint stain underneath. He held the splinters up to the light, turning them over in his fingers. "This wood's been treated," he said quietly. I frowned. "Yeah, so? Treated. Lumber's not illegal." "Treated with what, though?" He stood up and looked at me. You know what kind of treatment this mill uses? I shook my head. I'm just the driver. I don't get involved in the processing. Leaf's expression darkened. This wood's been pressure treated with chromated copper arsenate, CCA. It's banned for residential use because it's toxic. The only legal applications are industrial, marine pilings, utility poles, that kind of thing. And even then, it has to be documented and tracked. This load? He gestured at the pallets. This is being shipped to a residential processing plant. That's a violation. My heart sank. I didn't know. I just loaded what they gave me. The manifest says it's standard Douglas fir. The manifest's wrong, or it's been falsified. He pulled out his phone and took several photos of the wood, the pallet IDs, and my truck's DOT number. I'm going to have to hold this load pending further investigation. You're not going anywhere until I sort this out. I felt a cold spike of panic. If the load was illegal, I could be fined, possibly lose my CDL, maybe even face criminal charges if it turned out I was knowingly transporting banned materials. But I wasn't. I had no idea. This was supposed to be a routine run. Leaf, I swear to God I didn't know, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I've been running this route for 3 years. I've never had a problem. Sina signed off on this. She gave me the manifest. If something's wrong, it's on the mill, not me. Leaf studied me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. I believe you. But that doesn't change the fact that you're carrying illegal cargo. I have to report this. He climbed down from the flatbed and headed back to the office. I stood there, rain soaking through my jacket, staring at the wood that was about to upend my entire career. My mind raced. How could this have happened? Sina had seemed tense, sure, but not guilty. Not like she was handing me a load that could get us both arrested. Unless she didn't know either. Unless someone at the mill was running a side operation, treating wood off the books and slipping it into legitimate shipments. Or maybe she did know. Maybe that's why she'd been so insistent about me getting out of the loading zone quickly, so eager to rush me through the paperwork. Maybe I was the patsy, the unwitting mule hauling contraband timber, while she and whoever else was involved pocketed the profits. Leaf came back out, his face grim. I just spoke to my supervisor. We're impounding the load. You're free to go, but your truck stays here until we finish the investigation. I've also contacted the mill. Someone's going to need to come down here and answer some questions. I felt a wave of relief mixed with dread. At least I wasn't being arrested. But losing the truck meant losing work, losing income, losing credibility with my company. And if the investigation dragged on, I could be sidelined for weeks. How long's this going to take? I asked. Leaf shrugged. Depends on what we find. Could be a few days. Could be longer. You'll need to arrange alternative transport home. I pulled out my phone and called my dispatcher, explained the situation as calmly as I could. She was sympathetic but firm. Without the truck, I couldn't work. She'd reassign my upcoming loads to other drivers and let me know when I could resume. I thanked her and hung up, feeling numb. Leaf handed me a printed receipt for the impounded load. You'll get a copy of the investigation report once it's complete. If you're clean, you'll get your truck back. If not, he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. I called a friend who lived in Darrington and asked for a ride back to Tacoma. While I waited, I sat on the curb outside the weigh station, watching as Leaf and 2 other inspectors carefully unloaded and cataloged every pallet on my truck. They worked methodically, taking photos, scraping samples, marking each piece with evidence tags. It was surreal, watching my livelihood being dissected like a crime scene. My friend showed up about an hour later, and I climbed into his beat-up Ford Ranger without a word. As we pulled away, I looked back at the way station. My truck sat there, stranded and still, surrounded by inspectors and flashing yellow lights. I thought about Sina Darrow, standing outside the mill office, smoking her cigarette and telling me the load was clean. I thought about the tightness in her voice, the way she'd avoided eye contact when I asked if there was anything I should know. She'd lied to me. Or at least she'd kept something from me. And now I was paying the price. But as angry as I was, I couldn't shake the feeling that Sina wasn't the mastermind here. She was just another cog in a machine, same as me. Someone higher up was calling the shots. Someone who knew exactly what they were doing and didn't care who got burned in the process. I didn't hear from Leaf or the DOT for 3 days. 3 long, agonizing days of sitting at home, checking my phone every 5 minutes, replaying the entire morning in my head. On the 4th day, I got a call from an unknown number. I answered, and a woman's voice introduced herself as an investigator with the Washington State Department of Natural Resources. She wanted to meet. We arranged to meet at a diner in Everett, neutral ground. I arrived early and ordered coffee, my stomach too twisted to eat. She showed up 10 minutes later, a tall, severe-looking woman in her 50s, carrying a briefcase and wearing a state ID badge clipped to her belt. She slid into the booth across from me and got straight to the point. "Mr. Kincaid, I've reviewed the report from the way station. Based on the evidence and your cooperation, we don't believe you had knowledge of the illegal cargo. You're not being charged." I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. "Thank you." She nodded. "However, the mill you picked up from is under investigation. We've identified a pattern of fraudulent manifests and off-book treatments. Several employees, including the foreman, are persons of interest." Sina. So she was involved. I felt a strange mix of vindication and sadness. "What happens now?" I asked. The investigator leaned back. "That's up to the state attorney's office. But I can tell you this, if you're willing to testify about what happened that morning, it could help build a case." I thought about it. Testifying meant getting dragged into court, reliving the whole ordeal, possibly making enemies of people who might not take kindly to being exposed. But it also meant holding someone accountable. It meant making sure this didn't happen to another driver. "I'll do it," I said. She smiled faintly. "Good, we'll be in touch." She left, and I sat there alone in the booth, staring at my cold coffee. My truck was released 2 days later, and I went back to work. But the route was different now. The mill outside Concrete was shut down pending the investigation, and Rainier Freight reassigned me to a different circuit, hauling freight along the coast instead of through the mountains. I didn't mind. The Cascades had lost some of their beauty for me. Now, when I looked at those towering trees and mist-covered ridges, all I could think about was how easy it was to hide something in plain sight, how trust could be weaponized, how a simple load of timber could carry secrets that cost people their jobs, their freedom, maybe even their lives. The first week back on the road felt wrong. I'd been driving the same Cascades route for 3 years, and suddenly I was hauling refrigerated goods along the coast. Astoria to Bellingham, sometimes down to Newport if the company needed coverage. The pay was the same, the hours were similar, but everything else felt off. I missed the mountains, the smell of fresh-cut timber, even the sketchy logging roads. But more than that, I couldn't stop thinking about what had happened at the way station. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Leif Halverson's face as he scraped that wood sample, the way his jaw had tightened when I mentioned Sina Darrow's name. The investigator from the DNR had told me the mill was under investigation, but she'd been vague about the details. I didn't know if Sina had been arrested, if she'd cooperated, or if she'd lawyered up and denied everything. Part of me wanted to know. Another part of me wanted to forget the whole thing and move on. But I couldn't. 3 weeks after the way station incident, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer. Too many spam calls lately, but something made me pick up. "Mr. Kincaid?" The voice was male, older, with a slight rasp, like he'd been a smoker for years. "Yeah, who's this?" There was a pause, long enough that I thought the call had dropped. Then, "My name's not important. What's important is that you're in danger." I felt my stomach drop. "What are you talking about?" "That load you picked up from the mill, the one that got impounded. You think that was an accident?" I pulled over to the shoulder, my hands suddenly shaking. "Who is this? How did you get my number?" "Listen carefully. The people running that operation at the mill, they know you talked to the DNR. They know you agreed to testify, and they're not happy about it." My mouth went dry. "Are you threatening me?" "I'm warning you," the voice said. "I used to work at that mill. I got out before things went sideways, but I know how these people operate. You need to watch your back. Don't drive alone at night. Don't take routes you're not familiar with. And for God's sake, don't trust anyone connected to that place." The line went dead. I sat there on the shoulder for a long time, semi-idling, hazards flashing. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I tried calling the number back, but it went straight to a generic voicemail. I thought about calling the DNR investigator, but what would I even say? Some anonymous caller warned me I was in danger. She'd probably tell me it was a prank, someone trying to scare me into backing out of my testimony. But the caller had known details. He'd known about the impounded load, about the DNR, about my agreement to testify. That wasn't public information. Someone on the inside had leaked it. Or someone on the outside was keeping very close tabs on the investigation. I tried to shake it off, told myself I was being paranoid. But that night, back in my apartment in Tacoma, I couldn't sleep. Every sound in the hallway made me jump. Every set of headlights passing by my window felt like a threat. I got up around 2 in the morning and checked the locks on my door 3 times. I even dragged a chair over and wedged it under the doorknob, something I hadn't done since I was a kid afraid of monsters in the closet. Except this time, the monsters were real. The next morning, I called my dispatcher and asked for a few days off. She didn't ask questions, just marked me as unavailable and wished me well. I needed to clear my head, figure out if I was actually in danger or just spiraling. I thought about driving out to the coast, finding a cheap motel, and disappearing for a while. But that felt like running, and I'd never been good at running from problems. Instead, I decided to do something that was probably stupid but felt necessary. I was going to drive back to that mill. Not to confront anyone, I wasn't that reckless, but to see if I could figure out what was really going on. The DNR investigator had been tight-lipped about the details, and the anonymous caller had only given me vague warnings. I needed answers, and the only place I was going to find them was at the source. I knew the mill had been shut down, so I wasn't worried about running into Sina or any of the other employees. I just wanted to look around, maybe spot something that didn't add up, something that could explain why a routine timber load had turned into a criminal investigation. I left Tacoma early on a Thursday morning, driving my personal truck instead of the semi. The route took me up Highway 530, the same road I'd driven dozens of times before. But this time, I wasn't hauling anything. I was just a guy in a pickup, heading into the mountains with a gnawing sense of dread in his gut. The weather was overcast, typical for late fall, with low clouds clinging to the ridgelines and a steady drizzle that turned the windshield into a smeared mess. I passed the way station around mid-morning. Leaf's patrol car was parked out front, and I saw him through the window of the office, talking on the phone. I kept my eyes forward and didn't slow down. 20 minutes later, I turned onto the logging road that led to the mill. The road was worse than I remembered. Deeper potholes, more washouts, sections where the gravel had been completely washed away and replaced with slick mud. I took it slow, gripping the wheel tight as my truck bounced and slid through the ruts. The forest felt oppressive, the trees so dense and tall that almost no light reached the ground. It was like driving through a tunnel that never ended. The mill appeared after about 30 minutes of rough driving. It looked abandoned. The gate was chained shut, and a hand-painted sign hung from the fence. Property under investigation. No trespassing. Violators will be prosecuted. I parked my truck on the shoulder about 50 yards away and killed the engine. For a few minutes, I just sat there, staring at the mill through the rain-streaked windshield. The place looked dead. No lights, no movement, no sound except for the patter of rain on metal roofs. I thought about turning around and heading back to Tacoma. This was a bad idea. If someone saw me here, I could be accused of tampering with evidence or interfering with an investigation. But I'd driven all this way, and I wasn't going to leave without at least taking a look around. I grabbed a flashlight from the glove box, pulled my hood up against the rain, and climbed out of the truck. The chain on the gate was secured with a heavy padlock, but the fence itself was old and sagging. I found a section where the chain link had been bent back, probably by someone else who'd had the same idea I did, and squeezed through. My jacket caught on the wire and tore, but I didn't care. I was already soaked. The mill yard was a mess. Pallets of unfinished lumber sat in the rain, warping and rotting. A forklift was parked near the main building, its tires flat and its paint peeling. Puddles had formed in the low spots, reflecting the gray sky like broken mirrors. I walked slowly, keeping my head on a swivel. The office trailer where Sina had handed me the manifest was still standing, but the door was hanging open, creaking in the wind. I approached cautiously and shone my flashlight inside. The place had been ransacked. Filing cabinets were overturned, papers scattered everywhere, desk drawers pulled out and dumped on the floor. It looked like someone had been searching for something specific and hadn't cared about the mess they left behind. I stepped inside, my boots crunching on broken glass. The air smelled like mildew and old smoke. I crouched down and sifted through some of the papers on the floor. Invoices, delivery receipts, employee timesheets. Nothing out of the ordinary. But then I noticed something wedged under the overturned filing cabinet. I pulled it out carefully. It was a ledger, the old-fashioned kind with a marbled cover and handwritten entries. I flipped it open and started reading. The entries were dates, quantities, and initials. No names, just initials. But the pattern was clear. Every few days there was an entry for CCA treatment, followed by a board foot count and a set of initials, SD, Signa Darrow. My stomach turned. So she had been involved. But as I kept reading, I noticed something else. Some of the entries had a second set of initials next to them. LH. Leif Halverson. I stared at the page, my mind racing. Leif had been the one to catch the illegal load. He'd been the one to impound my truck and call in the investigation. But if his initials were in this ledger, that meant he was part of the operation. Unless he'd been investigating it from the inside. Unless he'd known something was wrong and had been waiting for the right moment to blow the whole thing open. Or maybe he'd been covering his tracks. Maybe he'd impounded my load, not because he was trying to stop the illegal shipments, but because I'd accidentally stumbled into something I wasn't supposed to see. My hands were shaking as I tucked the ledger under my jacket. I needed to get out of here. I needed to show this to the DNR investigator and let her figure out what it meant. I turned to leave, but froze when I heard a sound outside. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, crunching through the gravel. I killed my flashlight and pressed myself against the wall, heart hammering in my chest. The footsteps stopped just outside the trailer door. I held my breath, praying whoever it was would move on. But they didn't. The door creaked open wider, and a figure stepped inside. It was too dark to make out details, but I could see the silhouette. Broad shoulders, a heavy coat, something in their right hand. A flashlight or maybe a weapon. The figure swept their light around the room, the beam cutting through the darkness like a blade. I ducked behind the overturned desk, pressing myself as flat as I could against the floor. The beam passed over my hiding spot, lingered for a moment, then moved on. I heard the person muttering something under their breath, too quiet to make out. Then the footsteps started again, moving deeper into the trailer. This was my chance. I crawled toward the door, moving as silently as I could, my knees soaking through on the wet floor. I reached the threshold and risked a glance back. The figure had their back to me, shining their light into the corner where the filing cabinets had been stacked. I slipped out the door and ran. I didn't stop running until I reached my truck. I fumbled with the keys, my hands shaking so badly I almost dropped them. I finally got the door open, threw myself inside, and locked it. I started the engine and threw the truck into reverse, spinning the tires as I backed away from the mill. I didn't turn on my headlights until I was back on the logging road, and even then, I kept checking the rearview mirror, expecting to see someone following me, but the road behind me stayed empty. I drove back to the highway in a daze, my mind replaying what I'd just seen. Who had that person been? An investigator? A looter? Someone connected to the illegal operation, coming back to destroy evidence. I didn't know, and I wasn't going to stick around to find out. When I hit the highway, I pulled over at the first rest stop I saw and called the DNR investigator. She answered on the third ring. "Mr. Kincaid, is everything all right?" I told her everything. The anonymous call, the drive to the mill, the ransacked office, the ledger, the figure in the trailer. She listened without interrupting, and when I finished, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. "You shouldn't have gone there," she said finally, her voice tight. "That was extremely dangerous. I know, I'm sorry, but I found something. A ledger with initials. SD and LH signed Darrow and Leif Halverson. They were both involved." Another silence, then, "Where are you right now?" "Rest stop on Highway 530, about 10 miles east of Darrington." "Stay there. I'm sending someone to pick up that ledger. Do not go home. Do not go anywhere alone. Do you understand?" The fear in her voice made my blood run cold. What's going on? Why are you so worried? She hesitated. Leif Halverson didn't show up for work this morning. His supervisor tried calling him, but his phone's going straight to voicemail. We sent a unit to his house, and Mr. Kincaid, his house was empty, cleared out. It looks like he left in a hurry. My mouth went dry. You think he ran? I think he knows we're closing in. And if he's desperate enough to run, he's desperate enough to do something reckless. That's why I need you to stay put. We're going to make sure you're safe. I waited at that rest stop for 2 hours. The ledger clutched in my lap, jumping at every car that pulled in. Finally, a black SUV with government plates rolled up, and the DNR investigator stepped out. She was flanked by 2 state troopers, both armed. She took the ledger from me, flipped through it quickly, and nodded. This is good. This is exactly what we needed. One of the troopers stepped forward. Mr. Kincaid, we're going to escort you home. We'll have a unit stationed outside your apartment until we locate Halverson. You're not in immediate danger, but we're not taking any chances. I nodded numbly and followed them back to Tacoma. The whole drive, I kept thinking about Leif. I'd trusted him. I'd thought he was one of the good guys, the kind of inspector who did his job by the book and didn't cut corners. But if those initials in the ledger were his, then he'd been dirty all along. He'd been part of the operation, and when things started to fall apart, he tried to cover his tracks by impounding my load and playing the hero. And now he was gone, running, hiding, or maybe planning something worse. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my apartment with the lights off, watching the street through the window, waiting for something to happen. But nothing did. The state trooper's car stayed parked outside, its engine idling, its headlights cutting through the darkness, and somewhere out there Leif Halverson was still running. The DNR investigator called me the next morning. Her voice was calm, but I could hear the tension underneath. We found Halverson's truck abandoned near the Canadian border. It looks like he tried to cross on foot, but the Border Patrol picked him up. He's in custody now. I felt a wave of relief wash over me. Is it over? She paused. The investigation's ongoing, but the immediate threat is neutralized. Halvorson's talking. He's implicating several others, including Sina Darrow and a few mill employees. It's going to take time to sort through everything, but we're building a solid case. What about me? Am I still going to have to testify? Probably, but with Halverson in custody and the ledger as evidence, your testimony won't be the linchpin anymore. You'll just be corroborating what we already know. I thanked her and hung up. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe again. But the relief was short-lived. That afternoon, I got another call. This time, it was from my company. The dispatcher's voice was tight. "Kincaid, we need to talk. Can you come into the office?" I drove to the Rainier Freight Solutions headquarters, a low-slung building near the port of Tacoma. The dispatcher met me in the lobby, her face unreadable. "Follow me," she said, and led me to a small conference room. Sitting at the table was the company's owner, a grizzled guy in his 60s named Harold. He didn't stand when I entered, just gestured to the chair across from him. "Sit down, Abner." I sat. Harold leaned back and folded his arms. "I'm going to get right to it. We've been following the investigation into the mill, and we've seen the ledger you turned over to the DNR. Your name's not in it, and the investigators have cleared you of any wrongdoing. That's good." I nodded, not sure where this was going. "But here's the thing," Harold continued. "This whole situation has put a spotlight on our company. The DNR's asking questions about our vetting process, our relationships with suppliers, our oversight protocols. And the truth is, we don't have good answers. We trusted that mill and they burned us. That reflects poorly on Rainier Freight, and by extension, on you." My stomach sank. "You're firing me?" Harold shook his head. "No, but I'm taking you off the timber routes indefinitely. We're restructuring our contracts, and we can't afford to have someone involved in this mess, even indirectly, representing us to new clients. You'll stay on the coast routes for now. If things settle down in a few months, we'll revisit." I wanted to argue, to tell him that I'd done everything right, that I'd been the one to expose the illegal operation, but I knew it wouldn't matter. In his eyes, I was a liability. "Fine," I said quietly. Harold stood. "I'm sorry, Abner. I know this isn't fair, but it's business." I walked out of that office feeling hollowed out. I'd done the right thing, and it had cost me everything. 2 months later, I was still hauling refrigerated goods along the coast. The work was steady, the pay was decent, but I felt like a ghost. I'd lost my route, my routine, my sense of purpose. I'd helped take down a criminal operation, but instead of feeling like a hero, I just felt tired. One rainy afternoon, I was parked at a truck stop near Astoria waiting out a storm, when I saw a familiar face. Sina Darrow. She was walking across the parking lot, head down, hood pulled up against the rain. I almost didn't recognize her. She'd lost weight, and her face looked gaunt, haunted. She didn't see me. I watched as she climbed into an old sedan and drove away. I thought about following her, confronting her, demanding to know why she'd dragged me into her mess. But I didn't. I just sat there, watching her taillights disappear into the rain. Later that night, I got a text from an unknown number. It was short. "Thank you for what you did. L.H. Leif Halverson." I stared at the message for a long time, then deleted it. I didn't want his thanks. I didn't want anything from him. I just wanted to forget. But I knew I never would. Every time I drove past a way station, every time I saw a load of timber strapped to a flatbed, I'd remember that morning at Darrington. I'd remember the look on Leif's face as he scraped that wood sample. I'd remember the ledger, the initials, the figure in the trailer. And I'd remember that sometimes doing the right thing doesn't save you. It just makes you a witness to how broken everything really is. 6 months after the investigation closed, I was still running coastal routes. The monotony had become almost comforting. Pick up refrigerated seafood in Astoria. Deliver to distributors in Seattle. Repeat. No way station drama. No illegal cargo. No midnight phone calls warning me that my life was in danger. Just me, the highway, and the endless gray expanse of the Pacific Ocean. I told myself I was fine with it. I told myself the Cascades were behind me, that I'd moved on. But every time I passed the exit for Highway 530, I felt something twist in my chest. A mix of anger and longing and something I couldn't quite name. I missed the mountains. I missed the smell of fresh-cut timber. I even missed the sketchy logging roads and the constant threat of black bears blocking my path. The coast was beautiful, sure, but it felt hollow, like I was driving through someone else's life. It was early April when things started to unravel again. I was making a delivery run to a processing plant just south of Bellingham when I got a call from the DNR investigator. I hadn't heard from her in months, and seeing her name on my caller ID made my stomach drop. "Mr. Kincaid?" she said when I answered, her voice all business. "I need to ask you a few follow-up questions about the mill investigation. Can you meet me tomorrow afternoon?" I pulled into a rest area and killed the engine. I thought the case was closed. Leif and Sina both pleaded guilty, right? They did. But we've uncovered some additional evidence that suggests the operation was larger than we initially thought. There may have been other drivers involved, other mills, maybe even a distribution network spanning multiple states. We're trying to piece together the full scope, and we think you might be able to help. I rubbed my eyes, exhaustion settling over me like a heavy blanket. "I told you everything I know. I picked up one load, it got flagged, and I cooperated. What else is there?" She hesitated. "We found your truck's GPS data in the evidence Leif Halverson kept. He'd been tracking your routes for months before the way station incident. We're not sure why, but we think he was vetting you for something. Maybe trying to recruit you, or maybe just making sure you weren't a threat to the operation. Either way, we need to go through your delivery records and cross-reference them with the dates and locations in his files." The idea of Leif tracking me made my skin crawl. "Fine. When and where?" She gave me the address of a DNR field office in Olympia, and we set a meeting for 2 o'clock the next day. I hung up and sat there in the rest area, staring at the ocean through my windshield. Waves crashed against the rocks below, methodical and relentless, and I wondered how deep this thing really went. How many people had been involved? How many loads had I hauled without knowing what I was really carrying? The thought kept me awake that night. I drove to Olympia the next afternoon, my stomach churning the entire way. The DNR field office was a nondescript building tucked into an industrial park, all concrete and tinted windows. The investigator met me in the lobby and led me to a small conference room where a younger guy in a suit was waiting. He introduced himself as an assistant attorney general assigned to the case. We sat down, and they spread out a series of documents on the table: GPS printouts, delivery manifests, highlighted dates and routes. The investigator pointed to one of the printouts. "This is your truck's movement data from August through October of 2019. Do you recognize these routes?" I leaned in and studied the map. Most of it was familiar, my usual runs from the mill outside Concrete down to Everett, but there were a few routes that didn't make sense, detours that I didn't remember taking, stops at locations I'd never heard of. "I didn't drive these," I said, pointing to the anomalies. "I don't even know where this is." I tapped a circled location deep in the Cascades, miles from any main road. The investigator exchanged a glance with the attorney. "Are you sure? Because according to the GPS, your truck was at that location for over an hour on September 14th, 2019. I racked my brain, trying to remember. September 14th. That would have been a Saturday, one of my regular delivery days. I'd picked up a load, driven to Everett, unloaded, and driven back to Tacoma. Nothing unusual. "I didn't stop anywhere," I said firmly. "I went straight from the mill to the processing plant. That's it." The attorney leaned forward. "Is it possible someone else drove your truck that day? Maybe while you were on a break or during a shift change?" I shook my head. "I don't let anyone else drive my rig, ever, and I sure as hell didn't take a detour into the middle of nowhere." The investigator tapped her pen against the table, thinking. "What if someone tampered with your GPS? Planted a device that logged false locations to make it look like your truck was involved in the operation?" That sent a chill down my spine. "You're saying someone framed me?" "Not necessarily framed," the attorney said, "but possibly used your truck as cover. If they could make it look like you were making deliveries to off-book locations, it would muddy the investigative trail, make it harder for us to identify the real players." I thought about the anonymous phone call I'd gotten months ago, the warning to watch my back. At the time, I'd assumed it was someone trying to intimidate me into silence. But what if it had been something else? What if someone had been trying to warn me that I was being set up? "What do you need from me?" I asked. The investigator slid a stack of papers across the table. "We need you to go through every delivery you made between August and October 2019. Cross-check your personal logs, fuel receipts, anything that can verify your actual movements. If we can prove that you weren't at these locations, it'll help us narrow down who was." I spent the next 3 hours in that conference room, combing through old receipts and logbooks. My handwriting from 6 months ago felt like it belonged to a stranger. I found fuel receipts that confirmed I'd been on the main highway during the times the GPS claimed I was deep in the mountains. I found way station timestamps that didn't match the detour routes. Slowly, piece by piece, I built a timeline that exonerated me. The investigator nodded as she reviewed the documents. "This is good. This helps. We'll submit this to the prosecutor's office and see if we can get a warrant to examine your truck's GPS system for tampering." I left the office feeling drained. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the parking lot, and I sat in my truck for a long time before starting the engine. Someone had gone to a lot of trouble to make it look like I was part of the operation. Someone who had access to my truck, my schedule, my routes. The list of people who fit that description was short, and most of them were either in jail or under investigation. I drove back to Tacoma in silence, my mind spinning. When I got home, I did something I hadn't done in months. I pulled out the old route maps from my Cascades runs and spread them across my kitchen table. I marked every mill I'd picked up from, every way station I'd passed through, every processing plant I'd delivered to. Then I overlaid the GPS anomalies from the DNR's printouts. A pattern started to emerge. The false GPS locations weren't random. They were all clustered around a specific area, a remote stretch of national forest land northwest of Concrete, accessible only by unmarked logging roads. I grabbed my laptop and pulled up satellite imagery of the area. It was dense forest, no visible structures, no clearings. But when I zoomed in, I noticed something. Tire tracks. Faint, but unmistakable. Someone had been driving back there regularly and recently. I sat back, my heart pounding. This wasn't over. The investigation had closed. The main players were in custody, but there was still something out there. Something the DNR hadn't found yet, and whoever was running it had tried to pin it on me. I thought about calling the investigator, but I hesitated. What would I even tell her? That I'd spent my evening playing armchair detective and found some tire tracks on Google Earth? She'd probably tell me to let the professionals handle it and go back to my coastal roots. But I couldn't, not this time. I'd been dragged into this mess against my will, had my career derailed, my reputation questioned, my safety threatened, and now someone had tried to frame me. I wasn't going to sit back and wait for answers. I was going to find them myself. The next morning, I called in sick to work and loaded my personal truck with supplies: flashlight, battery pack, water, a road atlas, and a hunting knife I'd inherited from my grandfather. I wasn't planning on confronting anyone, but I wasn't going out there unarmed either. The drive to the Cascades felt surreal. I was retracing the same route I'd driven dozens of times for work, but this time I wasn't hauling timber. I was hunting for the truth. I passed the way station around mid-morning. A different inspector was on duty, someone I didn't recognize. I waved as I rolled by, and he waved back, oblivious. The turnoff to the logging road was exactly where the satellite imagery had shown it. A barely visible gap in the tree line, marked only by a faded Forest Service sign that read, "Road closed, authorized vehicles only." I ignored the sign and turned in. The road was worse than anything I'd driven during my timber runs. Deep ruts, fallen branches, sections where the ground had collapsed into muddy sinkholes. My truck bottomed out twice, the undercarriage scraping against rocks. I kept going, following the tire tracks visible in the mud. After about 30 minutes, the road opened into a small clearing, and that's when I saw it. A semi-truck parked at the far end of the clearing, half hidden under a camouflage tarp. My breath caught. I parked my truck at the edge of the clearing and approached on foot, moving slowly, every sense on high alert. The semi was old, the paint faded and streaked with rust, but the tires looked new. Someone had been using this truck recently. I circled around to the back and pulled aside the tarp. The flatbed was empty, but there were fresh gouges in the wood, recent scrapes from cargo that had been loaded and unloaded. I tried the cab door. Locked. I peered through the window and saw a clipboard on the passenger seat, papers clipped to it. I needed to see what was on those papers. I looked around for something to break the window with and found a fist-sized rock near the tree line. I hesitated, weighing the risk. Breaking into a vehicle was illegal, but so was whatever operation this truck was involved in. I smashed the window. The glass shattered inward, and I reached through and unlocked the door. The cab smelled like stale cigarettes and motor oil. I grabbed the clipboard and flipped through the papers. Delivery manifests, dates, locations, cargo descriptions. All of them listed timber, all of them signed off by someone with the initials SD Signadero. But the dates were recent, within the last 2 weeks. My blood ran cold. Signa was supposed to be in jail, awaiting sentencing. How the hell was she still running deliveries? I heard a sound behind me, a twig snapping. I spun around, heart racing, and saw a figure standing at the edge of the clearing. It was a woman, short, stocky, graying blonde hair pulled back in a ponytail. Signadero. She was holding a shotgun, pointed directly at me. "You shouldn't have come here, Kincaid," she said quietly. I raised my hand slowly. Signa, I thought you were in custody." She laughed, a bitter, hollow sound. "I was. Made bail last week. My lawyer's a shark. But that doesn't matter now. What matters is that you're trespassing on private property and interfering with my business." "Your business?" I gestured at the semi. "You mean your illegal timber operation? The one that got you arrested in the first place?" Her eyes hardened. "You don't know what you're talking about. This isn't the same thing. This is legitimate. I'm just trying to make a living." I took a step back, keeping my hands up. "Then why are you pointing a gun at me?" She didn't answer. We stood there in silence, the only sound the wind rustling through the trees. Then she lowered the shotgun slightly. "Leaf told me you were smart. Too smart for your own good. He said you'd figure it out eventually." "Figure what out?" I asked. "That the operation didn't end when he got arrested. That there were others involved, people higher up the chain, people who don't take kindly to loose ends." My stomach dropped. "Are you saying I'm a loose end?" Sina's expression softened, just for a moment. "I'm saying you need to leave. Right now. Get in your truck, drive back to Tacoma, and forget you ever saw this place. Because if you don't, the people I work for will make sure you disappear. And trust me, Kincaid, I don't want that. You did me a favor turning over that ledger. It gave the DNR enough to arrest Leaf, and he was the one who was really running things. I was just a pawn. But the people above him, they're still out there, and they're watching." I stared at her, trying to process what she was saying. "If you were just a pawn, why are you still doing this? Why not cooperate, cut a deal, get out?" She shook her head. "Because there is no getting out. Not for me. I'm in too deep. But you still have a chance. So take it." She raised the shotgun again, this time pointing it at the ground between us. "Go. Now." I didn't argue. I backed toward my truck, keeping my eyes on her, and climbed inside. As I started the engine, I saw her turn and walk back into the forest, the shotgun slung over her shoulder. I drove out of that clearing faster than I should have, the truck bouncing and sliding through the mud. I didn't stop until I hit the main highway, and even then, I kept checking my mirrors, expecting to see someone following me. I called the DNR investigator from a gas station and told her everything. She listened in silence, and when I finished, she let out a long breath. "You're lucky she didn't kill you." "I know." "We'll send a team out there first thing tomorrow. If that semi's still there, we'll impound it and bring Sina back in, but Kincaid? Yeah, stay away from this, you've done enough. Let us handle it from here." I agreed, but I knew I wouldn't be able to let it go. Not completely. Because Sina had been right about one thing. There were people higher up the chain, people who were still out there, and as long as they were free, I wasn't safe. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the look in Sina's eyes when she'd told me to leave. It wasn't anger. It was fear. She was terrified of whoever she was working for, and that terrified me. The next morning, the DNR raided the clearing, but when they got there, the semi was gone. So was Sina. The only thing left was the shattered window of the cab and my boot prints in the mud. The investigator called me later that day. "She's in the wind. We've issued a warrant, but she could be anywhere by now." I thanked her and hung up. I knew Sina wouldn't be found unless she wanted to be. And something told me she was running for her life, just like I was. I never went back to the Cascades after that. I stayed on the coast, driving the same routes day after day, trying to forget. But every time I passed a way station, every time I saw a semi hauling timber, I thought about Sina's warning, about the people higher up the chain, about how deep this thing really went, and I wondered if I'd ever really be free of it. 3 weeks after the clearing incident, I was still running coastal routes and pretending everything was normal. The DNR had gone quiet. No updates on Sina's whereabouts, no leads on the people she'd mentioned, the ones higher up the chain. The investigator had called once to tell me they'd traced the semi's VIN to a shell company registered in Delaware, but the trail went cold after that. Dead end after dead end. I got the sense they were wrapping up the investigation, declaring it a partial victory, and moving on. Leif Halverson was in prison. The mill outside Concrete was permanently shuttered. A few mid-level players had pleaded guilty to misdemeanors. For the state, that was enough. But for me, it wasn't. Because I knew the truth. The operation was still running, just deeper underground, and the people pulling the strings had never even been identified. I tried to ignore it. I focused on work, on keeping my head down, on not drawing attention to myself. But the paranoia never went away. Every time I stopped at a truck stop, I scanned the parking lot for familiar faces. Every time I heard footsteps behind me, I tensed up. I started carrying the hunting knife on my belt instead of leaving it in the glove box. I checked my truck for GPS trackers twice a week, running my hands along the undercarriage, pulling apart the dashboard, searching for anything that didn't belong. I never found anything. But that didn't make me feel safer. It just made me wonder if I was looking in the wrong places. It was late April, almost a year since the original way station incident, when things finally came to a head. I was making a routine delivery to a seafood distributor in Bellingham, hauling a refrigerated load of Dungeness crab from Astoria. The weather was clear, the traffic was light, and for once I was actually enjoying the drive. I had the radio on, windows cracked, the smell of salt air drifting in from the coast. I was about 20 miles south of Bellingham when I noticed the car behind me. A dark blue sedan, maybe 10 years old, staying exactly 3 car lengths back. At first, I didn't think anything of it. Plenty of people drive the same speed on the highway, but after 10 minutes, the car was still there. Same distance, same lane. I tapped my brakes, slowing down by 5 miles per hour. The sedan slowed too. I sped up. The sedan matched my speed. My hands tightened on the wheel. I told myself it was a coincidence, just another driver on autopilot not paying attention. But my gut told me otherwise. I took the next exit, a random turnoff leading to a small town I'd never been to. The sedan followed. Now I was sure. Someone was tailing me. I drove through the town, taking random turns, doubling back, trying to shake them. But the sedan stayed with me, always a few car lengths behind, never closing the gap, never falling back. Whoever was driving knew what they were doing. I pulled into a gas station and parked near the entrance, where the security cameras had a clear view. I killed the engine and waited, watching in the side mirror. The sedan drove past the station, slowed, then turned into a parking lot across the street. The driver didn't get out, just sat there waiting. I pulled out my phone and called the DNR investigator. No answer. I tried again. Voicemail. I cursed under my breath and considered calling 911. But what would I even say? Someone's following me, but they haven't done anything? The cops would tell me to file a report and send me on my way. I needed proof. I needed to know who was in that car and what they wanted. So I did something stupid. I got out of my truck and walked across the street. The sedan's windows were tinted, and I couldn't see inside. I approached slowly, keeping my hands visible, heart pounding in my chest. When I was about 10 feet away, the driver's door opened. A man stepped out. Tall, mid-50s, wearing a suit that looked expensive but rumpled, like he'd been wearing it for days. His hair was graying at the temples, his face lined and tired. He didn't look dangerous. He looked exhausted. "Abner Kincaid?" he said. His voice was calm, almost friendly. I stopped walking, Who's asking? He reached into his jacket, and I tensed, ready to run. But he just pulled out a business card and held it out to me. I didn't take it. He set it on the hood of the sedan and stepped back. My name's not important. What's important is that we talk. I glanced at the card. It was blank except for a phone number. No name, no company, no logo. Talk about what? I asked. About the operation you stumbled into, about the people running it, and about why you're still alive. That got my attention. I picked up the card, turned it over. Still blank. If you're trying to scare me, it's working. But I don't know anything. I told the DNR everything I know. I'm out. The man shook his head. You're not out. You were never out. The moment you picked up that load from the mill, you became part of this, and the people I work for have been watching you ever since. My blood ran cold. Who do you work for? He smiled faintly. Let's just say I'm a middleman. I don't make the decisions. I just deliver messages. And the message I'm here to deliver is this. Stop looking. Stop asking questions. Stop trying to piece together what happened. Because if you don't, the people above me will decide you're a liability, and liabilities get eliminated. I felt anger rising in my chest. I haven't been looking. I've been minding my own business, driving my routes, staying out of trouble. What more do you want from me? We want you to forget, he said simply. Forget the mill. Forget Sinadero. Forget Leif Halverson. Forget that clearing in the Cascades. Pretend none of it ever happened, because if you don't, we can't protect you. I laughed bitterly. Protect me? You're threatening me. I'm warning you, he said. There's a difference. The people I work for don't make threats. They just act. And if they decide you're a problem, you won't see it coming. One day, you'll be driving down the highway and your brakes will fail. Or you'll stop at a rest area and you won't wake up. Or your truck will get hit by another semi and it'll look like an accident. That's how they operate. Clean, efficient, untraceable. I stared at him, trying to read his face. He wasn't lying. I could see it in his eyes. He was genuinely trying to warn me. Why are you telling me this? I asked. Why not just let them kill me and be done with it? He looked away, his jaw tightening. Because I've been doing this for a long time, and I'm tired of cleaning up messes. You're not a bad guy, Kincaid. You got dragged into something you didn't understand and you tried to do the right thing. But the right thing doesn't always keep you alive. So I'm giving you a chance. Walk away. Forget, live your life. That's the best offer you're going to get. He turned and climbed back into the sedan. The engine started, and he rolled down the window. One more thing, he said. If you ever try to contact the DNR or the police or anyone else about this conversation, the offer's off the table. Understood. I nodded numbly. The sedan pulled out of the parking lot and disappeared down the highway. I stood there for a long time, the business card clutched in my hand, trying to process what had just happened. I drove to Bellingham in a daze, unloaded the crab and headed back to Tacoma. The whole drive, I kept checking my mirrors, expecting to see the sedan again. But the road stayed empty. That night, I sat in my apartment and stared at the blank business card. Part of me wanted to call the number, to demand answers, to fight back. But another part of me, the part that wanted to survive, told me to throw the card away and do exactly what the man had said. Forget. Move on. Pretend none of it ever happened. I thought about Sina's warning in the clearing, about the people higher up the chain, about how deep this thing really went. And I realized that I'd been naive. I'd thought that turning over the ledger, cooperating with the investigation, doing the right thing would be enough to protect me. But it hadn't. It had just painted a target on my back. The next morning, I made a decision. I wasn't going to forget. But I wasn't going to fight either. I was going to disappear. Not literally. I still needed to work, to pay my bills, to live my life. But I was going to become invisible. No more questions, no more digging, no more trying to piece together the puzzle. I would drive my routes, keep my head down, and blend into the background. I would become just another trucker, hauling refrigerated goods up and down the coast, unremarkable and forgettable. And for a while, it worked. Weeks turned into months, and nothing happened. No more sedans following me, no more anonymous phone calls, no more late-night visits from men in expensive suits. I started to think that maybe, just maybe, I was safe. But then, 6 months later, I got a package in the mail. No return address, no postage, just my name written in block letters on the front. Inside was a single photograph. It was a picture of me, taken from a distance, standing outside my apartment building. The photo was recent. I recognized the jacket I was wearing, the coffee cup in my hand. On the back, someone had written a single sentence in red ink. "We're still watching." I burned the photograph in my kitchen sink and flushed the ashes down the drain. Then I packed a bag, got in my truck, and drove. I didn't have a destination. I just needed to move, to put distance between myself and whatever was closing in. I ended up at a truck stop outside of Portland, sitting in my cab with the doors locked, staring at the blank business card I'd kept all these months. I pulled out my phone and dialed the number. It rang 3 times, then went to a generic voicemail. I didn't leave a message. I just hung up and sat there in the darkness, listening to the hum of idling engines and the distant sound of traffic on the interstate. I thought about Leif Halverson sitting in a prison cell, probably safer than I was. I thought about Sina Darrow, wherever she was, running for her life. And I thought about all the other drivers out there, hauling loads they didn't fully understand, trusting that the paperwork was clean and the cargo was legal. How many of them had stumbled into something like this? How many had been silenced, eliminated, erased? I didn't have answers. I probably never would. But I knew one thing for certain. The operation was still running. The people at the top were still out there, still moving illegal timber, still making money, still destroying lives. And as long as they were free, I would never be safe. I started the engine and pulled back onto the highway, merging into the flow of traffic. The road stretched out ahead of me, dark and endless, and I drove into it without looking back, because that's what you do when you're a trucker. You keep moving, you keep driving, even when you don't know where you're going, even when you know something's following you, even when you realize that the only way to survive is to pretend you never saw anything at all. And so I drive, up and down the coast, day after day, load after load. I pass way stations and think about Leif. I see logging trucks and think about Sina. I get anonymous calls that go straight to voicemail, and I delete them without listening. I check my mirrors obsessively. I vary my routes. I never stay in the same place twice. And every night before I fall asleep, I wonder if this will be the night they finally come for me. But they haven't. Not yet. Maybe they've decided I'm not a threat. Maybe they're just waiting for the right moment. Or maybe they're still watching, still testing, still deciding whether I'm worth the trouble. I don't know. And the worst part is I'll never know. That's what fear does to you. It doesn't need to kill you to destroy your life. It just needs to make you live in constant uncertainty, always looking over your shoulder, always waiting for the other shoe to drop. I haven't been back to the Cascades since that day in the clearing. I probably never will. But sometimes, late at night, when I'm driving through the rain and the road is empty and dark, I think about that hidden semi, about the tire tracks in the mud, about the manifest signed with Sina's initials. And I wonder how many other clearings are out there, hidden in the mountains, running operations that no one will ever uncover. How many other drivers are being used, manipulated, framed? How many other people are living in fear just like me? The truth is, I'll never know the full story. I'll never know who the people at the top are, or how far the network really extends, or what happened to Sina after she disappeared. All I know is that I was a pawn in a game I didn't understand, and I'm lucky to still be alive. But luck runs out eventually, and when mine does, I probably won't even see it coming. That's the real horror of it all. Not the threats, not the violence, not even the fear. It's the uncertainty, the not knowing. The realization that you can do everything right and still end up a casualty in someone else's war. So I keep driving. I keep my head down. I keep my mouth shut. And I hope that's enough. But deep down, I know the truth. It's never enough. Because once you've seen what I've seen, once you know what I know, there's no going back to normal. There's only the road, the endless miles of asphalt stretching out ahead, and the knowledge that somewhere out there, in the shadows of the Cascades, the operation is still running. The timber is still moving, the money is still changing hands, and the people at the top are still watching, still waiting, still deciding. I got a new text message 2 weeks ago. Unknown number, just 3 words. Drive safe, Kincaid. I deleted it immediately. But I couldn't delete the feeling it left behind. The certainty that they know where I am. That they've always known. That they're letting me live for now, as long as I stay quiet. As long as I keep pretending. As long as I play my part. And so I do. Because what choice do I have? I'm just a trucker. I haul freight, I follow routes, I mind my own business. That's all I've ever been. That's all I'll ever be. At least that's what I tell myself. Every single day. As I drive deeper into the night, alone on the highway watching the yellow lines disappear beneath my wheels. Knowing that somewhere behind me, or ahead of me, or beside me, they're still watching. Still waiting. And I'll never know when they'll decide I've outlived my usefulness. I'll just keep driving. Until the day I can't anymore. My name is Cyrus Merritt, and I've been hauling freight along the Oregon coast for the better part of 8 years. Most people think coastal trucking is easier than mountain routes. No steep grades, no ice, no switchbacks that'll send you tumbling into a ravine if you misjudge a turn. But the coast has its own dangers. Fog so thick you can't see 10 feet ahead. Wind that'll push a loaded semi sideways across the lane. And storms that roll in off the Pacific with almost no warning, turning Highway 101 into a gauntlet of flooded sections and debris-strewn shoulders. I've driven through all of it. I've white-knuckled my way through winter squalls that felt like they were trying to peel the roof off my cab. I've navigated around rock slides, downed power lines, and sections of highway where the asphalt had cracked and buckled from the constant assault of salt air and heavy rain. The coast is beautiful, sure, but it's unforgiving. And if you're not careful, it'll kill you just as dead as any mountain pass. The incident I'm about to tell you about happened in early March of 2021, right at the tail end of storm season. I was making a run from Coos Bay up to Astoria, hauling a mixed load of canned seafood and processed fish products bound for a distribution center near the Washington border. The route was simple enough. Stick to US 101, follow the coastline north, make a few stops at smaller processing plants to pick up additional cargo, then deliver everything to Astoria before the end of the week. I'd done the run dozens of times before, and I knew every mile of that highway like the back of my hand. The weather forecast that morning had called for scattered showers and moderate wind. Nothing unusual for early March. I'd checked the tide tables, too, a habit I'd picked up after nearly getting stranded on a flooded coastal access road a few years back. High tide was expected around 2 in the afternoon, which meant I needed to time my pickups carefully to avoid any low-lying sections of road that might flood. I loaded up in Coos Bay just after dawn, verified the manifest with the plant supervisor, and hit the road by 7. The first leg of the trip was smooth. The rain was light, the wind manageable, and traffic was almost non-existent. I made my first pickup at a small processing plant outside of Florence without any issues, added another pallet of smoked salmon to the load, and continued north. It was around noon when things started to change. The rain picked up, going from a light drizzle to a steady downpour in the span of maybe 15 minutes. The wind kicked up too, gusting hard enough that I had to grip the wheel with both hands to keep the semi from drifting. Visibility dropped to maybe 100 feet, and I slowed down to 40 miles per hour, hazards flashing. I was about 20 miles south of Newport when I saw the detour sign. It was one of those temporary orange signs, the kind highway crews put up when there's construction or an accident. The arrow pointed inland, away from the coast, onto a secondary road I wasn't familiar with. I slowed to a crawl and peered through the rain-streaked windshield, looking for more information. There was a second sign a few yards ahead. US 101 closed ahead, flooding, follow detour. I cursed under my breath. Flooding wasn't uncommon on this stretch of highway, especially during high tide combined with heavy rain. But I'd driven through here just 2 weeks ago, and there hadn't been any issues. Still, I wasn't about to argue with a road closure sign. I flicked on my turn signal and followed the detour onto the secondary road. The road was narrow, barely wide enough for my semi, and it climbed inland through dense coastal forest. The pavement was cracked and uneven, with potholes deep enough to bottom out my suspension if I hit them wrong. I took it slow, keeping my eyes on the road and my hands steady on the wheel. The detour signs appeared every quarter mile or so, yellow arrows pointing me forward, deeper into the forest. I kept expecting the road to loop back toward the coast, to rejoin US 101 a few miles north of the flooded section. But it didn't. It just kept winding inland, climbing higher, the forest closing in on both sides. After about 30 minutes, I started to get uneasy. I hadn't seen another car since I'd left the highway. No construction crews, no flaggers, no other trucks following the detour. Just me, alone on this narrow logging road, following signs that felt increasingly suspect. I thought about turning around, but the road was too narrow. There was no place to safely execute a U-turn with a loaded semi, and backing down a winding mountain road in a rainstorm was a recipe for disaster. So I kept going, trusting that the detour would eventually lead me back to civilization. That's when I saw the figure standing in the middle of the road. I slammed on the brakes and the semi lurched to a stop, the cargo shifting in the trailer with a heavy thud. My heart was pounding as I stared through the windshield, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. It was a person, I was sure of that much, but they were just standing there, motionless, in the middle of the road. They were wearing what looked like a bright yellow rain slicker, the kind highway workers use, and they had their back to me. I honked the horn, a long, loud blast that echoed through the forest. The figure didn't move. I honked again, leaning on the horn for a solid 5 seconds. Still nothing. My unease shifted into something closer to fear. This wasn't right. No one just stands in the middle of a road during a rainstorm, ignoring a semi that's 50 feet away and blaring its horn. I thought about backing up, trying to turn around despite the narrow road, but before I could shift into reverse, the figure turned around. And that's when I realized something was very, very wrong. The person was wearing a mask. Not a medical mask or a ski mask, but something else. It looked old, weathered, with a blank expression painted on it. No eyes, no mouth, just a smooth, featureless oval. They stood there, staring at me, or at least I assumed they were staring at me, even though I couldn't see their eyes. And then they raised one arm and pointed to the left, toward a gap in the trees I hadn't noticed before. I didn't move. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to get out of there, to reverse down the road, to do anything except follow that person's directions. But the road ahead was blocked, and the road behind me was too narrow to turn around. I was trapped. The figure lowered their arm and started walking toward the gap in the trees, their movements slow and deliberate. Then they stopped, turned back to face me, and pointed again. The message was clear. Follow me. I sat there for a long moment, gripping the wheel so hard my knuckles turned white, weighing my options. I could stay where I was and hope the figure would eventually leave. I could try backing down the road, risking a crash or getting stuck. Or I could follow them and hope this was just some bizarre way of directing traffic around a washed-out section of road. Against every rational thought in my head, I chose the third option. I shifted into first gear and eased the semi forward, turning toward the gap in the trees. The path was barely wide enough for my truck, branches scraping against the sides of the trailer as I squeezed through. The figure in the yellow slicker walked ahead of me, always staying just at the edge of my headlights, never looking back. We continued like this for maybe 10 minutes, the path growing narrower and more overgrown with each passing yard. I was certain I'd made a terrible mistake. This wasn't a detour. This was something else entirely. And then, just as I was about to stop and refuse to go any further, the path opened up into a small clearing. And sitting in the middle of that clearing was a building. It was a single-story structure, old and weathered, with peeling paint and boarded-up windows. It looked like it had been abandoned for decades. There was a faded sign hanging above the door, but the rain and darkness made it impossible to read. The figure in the yellow slicker stopped at the edge of the clearing and turned to face me one last time. Then they raised their arm and pointed at the building. I stared at the structure, my mind racing. What the hell was this place? Why had they led me here? And more importantly, what were they expecting me to do? I rolled down my window, letting the cold rain blow into the cab, and shouted, "What do you want?" My voice sounded small and insignificant against the roar of the storm. The figure didn't respond. They just stood there, arm outstretched, pointing. Then, slowly, they lowered their arm, turned, and walked back into the forest. Within seconds, they'd disappeared completely, swallowed by the trees and the rain. I sat there in the clearing, engine idling, staring at the building. Every part of me wanted to throw the semi into reverse and get the hell out of there. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was missing something, that there was a reason I'd been led here, that maybe, somehow, this was connected to the detour, to the flooded highway, to everything that had felt wrong about this trip from the moment I'd left Coos Bay. So I did something stupid. I killed the engine, grabbed my flashlight from the glove box, and climbed out of the cab. The rain hit me like a physical force, soaking through my jacket in seconds. I flicked on the flashlight and approached the building, my boots squelching in the mud. The front door was partially open, hanging crooked on rusted hinges. I pushed it the rest of the way open and shone my light inside. The interior was a mess. Broken furniture, shattered glass, old papers scattered across the floor. It looked like it had been ransacked, or maybe just left to rot after whoever owned it had abandoned it. I stepped inside, sweeping my flashlight across the room. There was a counter along one wall, the kind you'd see in an old general store or trading post. Behind it, shelves lined the wall, most of them empty except for a few dusty bottles and rusted cans. On the opposite wall, there was a large map, yellowed and torn, showing the Oregon coastline. Someone had marked it up with red pen, circling certain locations and drawing lines between them. I walked over to the map and studied it more closely. The circles seemed to correspond to coastal towns: Newport, Yakutat, Florence, Bandon, and the lines connecting them followed the route of US 101. But there were also marks farther inland, in areas that didn't correspond to any roads I knew. Places deep in the forest, miles from the nearest town. At the bottom of the map, someone had written a single word in block letters: shipments. I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. Shipments of what? And why would someone mark up a map like this, then abandon it in a derelict building in the middle of nowhere? I was about to leave when I noticed something else. There was a door at the back of the room, partially hidden behind a collapsed bookshelf. I moved the shelf aside and tried the door. It was locked, but the wood was old and brittle. I put my shoulder into it and the door splintered open with a crack that echoed through the building. Beyond the door was a narrow hallway, and at the end of the hallway was another room. I walked down the hall slowly, every creak of the floorboard setting my nerves on edge. When I reached the end, I pushed open the door and shone my light inside. The room was small, maybe 10 feet by 10 feet, with a single window that had been boarded up from the outside. In the center of the room was a metal desk, and on the desk was a stack of papers. I walked over and picked up the top sheet. It was a shipping manifest dated 3 weeks ago. The cargo was listed as processed seafood, and the destination was Astoria, the same destination I was headed to. My hands started to shake as I flipped through the rest of the papers. They were all shipping manifests, dozens of them, dating back over the past 6 months. All of them listed the same cargo, processed seafood. All of them listed the same destination, Astoria, and all of them had been signed off by the same person, Olin Petgrave. I recognized the name immediately. Olin Petgrave was the harbor master at one of the smaller docks in Newport, a gruff, no-nonsense guy in his early 60s who'd been working the docks for as long as anyone could remember. I'd met him a handful of times over the years, always brief interactions when I was picking up or dropping off cargo. He'd always seemed professional, if a bit brusque. But seeing his name on these manifests, in this abandoned building, in the middle of a forest miles from any dock, set off alarm bells in my head. I stuffed a few of the manifests into my jacket and turned to leave. That's when I heard it. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, coming from the hallway. I killed my flashlight and pressed myself against the wall, heart hammering in my chest. The footsteps grew louder, closer. Then they stopped, just outside the door. I held my breath, praying whoever it was would move on. But they didn't. The door creaked open, and a beam of light swept across the room. I caught a glimpse of the figure in the doorway. Tall, broad-shouldered, wearing the same yellow rain slicker as the person who'd led me here. But this wasn't the same person. I could tell by the build, the posture. This was someone else. The figure stepped into the room, their flashlight sweeping methodically across the walls, the desk, the corners. I stayed perfectly still, barely daring to breathe. The light passed over my hiding spot once, then doubled back. And that's when I ran. I shoved past the figure, slamming my shoulder into them and knocking them off balance. They let out a surprised grunt, and their flashlight clattered to the floor. I sprinted down the hallway, burst through the front door, and ran toward my semi. I could hear the figure behind me, shouting something I couldn't make out over the roar of the storm. I threw open the cab door, jumped inside, and fired up the engine. The semi roared to life, and I threw it into reverse, backing out of the clearing as fast as I dared. Branches scraped against the trailer, and I heard something, maybe a side mirror, maybe part of the cargo rigging, snap off with a metallic clang. I didn't care, I just needed to get out of there. I backed down the narrow path until I reached the main road, then threw the truck into drive and floored it. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely keep the wheel straight. I drove for maybe 20 minutes, following the detour signs in reverse, until I finally saw the glow of streetlights ahead. The road merged back onto US 101 just south of Newport, exactly where I'd expected the detour to end. But there was no flooding, no road closure, no sign that US 101 had ever been closed in the first place. I pulled into the first truck stop I saw and sat there in the parking lot, engine idling, trying to process what had just happened. Someone had set up fake detour signs. Someone had led me into the forest to that abandoned building for a reason I didn't fully understand. And someone had been waiting there ready to confront me when I found those manifests. I pulled out the papers I'd stuffed into my jacket and read through them again under the dome light of my cab. Every single one bore Olin Petgrave's signature. Every single one listed cargo bound for Astoria. And every single one had irregularities, mismatched weights, vague cargo descriptions, pickup times that didn't align with any dock schedules I was familiar with. I thought about calling the police, but what would I even tell them? That I'd followed a fake detour, been led to an abandoned building by someone in a mask, and found suspicious shipping manifests? They'd probably think I was delusional, suffering from exhaustion or hypothermia. I needed proof. I needed to figure out what was really going on. And the only way to do that was to keep driving north, to Newport, and to confront Olin Petgrave directly. So that's exactly what I did. I pulled out of the truck stop and merged back onto US 101, the storm still raging around me, the road ahead dark and uncertain. I had no idea what I was walking into, but I knew one thing for certain. Whatever operation Olin Petgrave was running, it was big enough to warrant fake detours, masked figures in the woods, and manifests that didn't add up. And I'd just stumbled into the middle of it. The miles ticked by, and with each one, the knot in my stomach grew tighter. Because I knew that once I reached Newport, once I confronted Olin, there would be no going back. I'd crossed a line the moment I walked into that building. And now, whether I liked it or not, I was part of whatever dark current was running beneath the surface of the Oregon coast. I reached Newport just after 3 in the afternoon, the storm still hammering the coast with sheets of rain that turned the windshield into a blurred mess. The docks were on the south side of town, a sprawling collection of piers and warehouses where fishing boats unloaded their catches and processing plants worked around the clock to turn raw seafood into products bound for markets across the country. I'd been here dozens of times before, always during the day, always as part of a routine pickup or delivery. But today felt different. Today I wasn't here for work. I was here for answers. I parked my semi in the main lot and killed the engine, sitting in the cab for a few minutes to collect my thoughts. The manifests I'd taken from the abandoned building were still in my jacket, damp from the rain, but readable. I pulled them out and studied them again, looking for anything I might have missed. The signatures were definitely Olin Petgrave's. I'd seen his handwriting enough times to recognize the tight, angular script, but the cargo descriptions were vague, almost deliberately so. Processed seafood could mean anything: canned tuna, smoked salmon, frozen crab, shellfish meal. And the weights listed on the manifests didn't match the standard pallet configurations I was used to seeing. Some were too light, others too heavy. It was sloppy work, the kind of thing that would get flagged during a routine inspection if anyone bothered to look closely enough. I climbed out of the cab and pulled my hood up against the rain. The docks were busy despite the weather. Forklifts moving pallets between warehouses, workers in rain gear shouting instructions over the howl of the wind. I made my way toward the harbor master's office, a squat concrete building at the far end of the main pier. The door was unlocked, and I pushed it open without knocking. The office was small and cluttered, the walls covered with nautical charts, tide tables, and safety notices. A space heater hummed in the corner, and the air smelled like coffee and old cigarette smoke. Olin Petgrave was sitting behind a metal desk, hunched over a stack of paperwork. He looked up as I entered, his expression shifting from mild annoyance to recognition. "Merritt," he said, leaning back in his chair. "Didn't know you had a delivery scheduled today." I shook the rain off my jacket and closed the door behind me. "I don't. I'm here to talk." Olin's eyes narrowed slightly. "About what?" I pulled the manifests from my jacket and dropped them on his desk. "About these." For a moment, Olin didn't move. He just stared at the papers, his face unreadable. Then he picked up the top sheet and scanned it, his jaw tightening. "Where did you get these?" he asked quietly. "From an abandoned building about 30 miles south of here. Someone led me there, someone wearing a mask and a yellow rain slicker. They set up fake detour signs and funneled me off the highway." Olin set the manifest down and folded his hands on the desk. "And why would someone do that?" I leaned forward, planting my palms on the edge of the desk. "That's what I'm asking you. Because every single one of those manifests has your signature on it. And every single one of them has irregularities, wrong weights, vague descriptions, pickup times that don't make sense. So either you're running something off the books, or someone's forging your signature to cover their tracks. Which is it?" Olin studied me for a long moment, his expression cold and calculating. Then he stood up, walked to the door, and locked it. The click of the deadbolt echoed in the small room, and I felt a spike of adrenaline. "Sit down, Merritt," he said, gesturing to a chair. I didn't move. "I'm fine standing." He shrugged and walked back to his desk, pulling a ring of keys from his pocket. He unlocked a drawer, reached inside, and pulled out a thick manila folder. He set it on the desk between us and opened it. Inside were more manifests, dozens of them, all bearing his signature. "You're not the first person to find those papers," he said. "And you're not the first person to come here asking questions, but you might be the first one stupid enough to actually confront me about it." My hands curled into fists. "So, you're admitting it, you're running something illegal?" Olin shook his head. "I'm not running anything. I'm just a cog in the machine, same as you. The difference is, I know when to keep my mouth shut." He sat down again and pulled out a cigarette, lighting it with a cheap plastic lighter. He took a long drag, exhaled, and looked at me through the smoke. "You want to know what's going on? Fine, I'll tell you. But once I do, you're in it, you understand? There's no walking away, no pretending you didn't hear this. Once you know, you're part of it." I swallowed hard, my mouth suddenly dry. "I'm already part of it. Someone led me to that building for a reason, and I'm guessing it wasn't because they wanted to scare me off." Olin smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "No, it was a test. To see if you'd take the bait, to see if you'd go digging, and you did. So congratulations, Merritt, you passed." He leaned back in his chair and gestured at the manifests. "Those shipments you found, they're real, but the cargo isn't what's listed on the paperwork. The crates say processed seafood, but that's just cover. What's really inside is something a lot more valuable, and a lot more illegal." My stomach dropped. "What are you talking about? What's in the crates?" Olin tapped ash from his cigarette into a tray on his desk. "Pharmaceuticals, high-grade opioids mostly, fentanyl, oxycodone, hydromorphone. Stuff that gets smuggled in from Canada and Asia, repackaged here and distributed to buyers up and down the coast. The docks are perfect for it. Constant shipments coming in and out, minimal oversight, and enough legitimate cargo to bury the illegal stuff. No one looks twice at a pallet of canned tuna." I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. "And you're part of this? You're helping them smuggle drugs?" Olin shrugged. "I sign manifests. I make sure the right shipments get cleared through customs without too much scrutiny. I keep my mouth shut and collect a paycheck. It's not complicated. I stared at him, disbelief and anger warring in my chest. You're poisoning people. You're helping flood communities with drugs that are killing. Save it. Olin interrupted, his voice minor. You think I don't know that? You think I don't see the bodies washing up on the beaches, the overdoses, the families torn apart? I know exactly what I'm doing, and I don't need you standing there acting like you're better than me. He stubbed out his cigarette and stood up, walking to the window. The rain streaked down the glass, distorting the view of the docks beyond. You want to know why I do it? Because I don't have a choice. The people running this operation aren't the kind of people you say no to. You either play along or you disappear, simple as that. I shook my head. There's always a choice. Olin turned to face me, his expression hard. Is there? Then make yours, Merritt. You can walk out of here right now, get back in your truck, and forget this conversation ever happened. Or you can try to be a hero, go to the cops, and see how long it takes before you end up in a ditch somewhere. What's it going to be? I didn't answer. I just stood there, my mind racing, trying to figure out my next move. Olin watched me for a moment, then sighed. Look, I don't want you to get hurt. You seem like a decent guy. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to give you a piece of advice. Stay out of this. Don't dig any deeper. Don't go to the authorities. Just finish your delivery, go home, and pretend this never happened. Because if you don't, the people I work for will find out. And when they do, they'll come for you. And trust me, they're a lot scarier than some guy in a mask. I turned and walked toward the door, my hand reaching for the deadbolt. I'm not going to pretend this never happened, I said quietly. And I'm not going to let you keep doing this. Olin laughed, a bitter, humorless sound. Then you're a dead man, Merritt. You just don't know it yet. I unlocked the door and stepped out into the rain, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. I made it halfway across the parking lot before I heard footsteps behind me. I turned and saw a woman approaching, her EMT uniform visible under her rain jacket. She was in her late 30s with short dark hair and sharp, intelligent eyes. I recognized her immediately. Tamsin Crow, one of the paramedics who worked out of the Newport fire station. I'd met her once before, a few years back, when I'd been on scene for a minor accident involving a delivery truck. "Cyrus Merritt," she called out, raising her voice over the storm. I stopped and waited for her to catch up. "Yeah, what do you need?" Tamsin glanced over her shoulder toward the harbor master's office, then back at me. "I need to talk to you, somewhere private. It's important." I hesitated. "About what?" She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "About Olin Petgrave, and about what's really going on at these docks." My blood ran cold. "How do you know about that?" Tamsin looked around again, her expression tense. "Because I've been documenting it for months. I've been trying to gather enough evidence to take to the state police, but every time I get close, something happens. Witnesses disappear. Records go missing. I think someone's been tipping them off." She looked me in the eye. "But if you've got something, anything, that can help me build a case, I need to see it. Because people are dying, Merritt, and if we don't stop this, it's only going to get worse." I thought about the manifest in my jacket, about the abandoned building in the forest, about the masked figures who'd led me there, and I thought about Olin's warning, about the people he worked for, about what they'd do if they found out I was cooperating with someone trying to expose them. But I also thought about the bodies Tamsin had mentioned, about the overdoses, about the communities being destroyed by the drugs flowing through these docks, and I made my choice. "Come with me," I said, and led her toward my semi. We climbed into the cab. out of the rain, and I spread the manifests out on the dashboard. Tamsin studied them carefully, her eyes scanning every detail, her fingers tracing the signatures and cargo descriptions. "This is exactly what I've been looking for," she said quietly. "These manifests prove that Olin's been signing off on shipments that don't match the cargo descriptions. If we can cross-reference these with the actual shipments that went out on those dates, we can prove the discrepancies." She pulled out her phone and started taking photos of the documents. "Where did you get these?" I told her about the detour, the masked figures, the abandoned building. She listened without interrupting, her expression growing darker with each detail. When I finished, she sat back and let out a long breath. "They were testing you, seeing if you'd take the bait, which means they've been watching you, probably for a while." A chill ran down my spine. "Why me?" Tamsin shook her head. "I don't know. Maybe they think you're a weak link. Maybe they're trying to recruit you. Or maybe they just want to see how much you know before they decide what to do with you." She tucked her phone back into her jacket. "Either way, you're in danger now. We both are. The people running this operation don't leave loose ends." I thought about Olin's words, about how I was a dead man. "So what do we do?" Tamsin thought for a moment, then pulled out a business card and handed it to me. "There's a state police detective I've been working with. His name's on that card. He's been investigating drug trafficking along the coast for the past 2 years, and he's clean. I've vetted him myself. I'll send him these photos and arrange a meeting. But in the meantime, you need to be careful. Don't go back to that building. Don't confront Olin again. And don't tell anyone else about this. Understood?" I nodded and tucked the card into my wallet. "What about you? Are you going to be safe?" She gave me a tight smile. "I've been doing this long enough to know how to cover my tracks. I'll be fine, just watch your back, Merritt. These people are ruthless, and they're everywhere." She climbed out of the cab and disappeared into the rain, leaving me alone with my thoughts. I sat there for a long time, staring at the manifests, trying to process everything that had just happened. I'd stumbled into something much bigger and much more dangerous than I'd ever imagined, and now there was no going back. I started the engine and pulled out of the parking lot, my hands trembling on the wheel. I still had a delivery to make in Astoria, but my mind was miles away, lost in a fog of fear and uncertainty. I kept checking my mirrors, expecting to see someone following me. But the road behind me stayed empty. That night, I stopped at a truck stop just north of Newport and tried to get some sleep. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw the masked figure standing in the road, pointing toward the abandoned building. I saw Olin's cold, calculating stare. I saw Tamsin's tense expression as she warned me to watch my back. Sleep didn't come. Around 2 a.m, my phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. I stared at the screen, my heart racing, and opened it. The message was short. "You shouldn't have taken those papers." I sat up, every nerve in my body on high alert. I tried calling the number back, but it went straight to a generic voicemail. I thought about calling Tamsin or the detective whose card she'd given me, but I didn't know what I'd even say. Someone knew I had the manifests. Someone knew I'd been to the building. And someone was watching me right now. I climbed out of the sleeper berth and checked the locks on the cab doors. Then I grabbed my flashlight and did a full inspection of the truck, checking the undercarriage, the cargo straps, the trailer. I didn't find anything out of the ordinary, but that didn't make me feel any better. I spent the rest of the night sitting in the cab with the lights off, watching the parking lot, waiting for something to happen. But nothing did. When dawn finally broke, I fired up the engine and continued north toward Astoria, my nerves frayed and my mind racing. I didn't know who'd sent that text. I didn't know how they'd gotten my number, But I knew one thing for certain. I was being hunted, and I had no idea how to escape. I made it to Astoria just before noon, my eyes burning from lack of sleep and my nerves stretched to the breaking point. The delivery went smoothly enough. I backed into the loading dock at the distribution center, verified the cargo with the receiving clerk, and watched as they unloaded the pallets one by one. Nobody said anything unusual. Nobody gave me strange looks. It was just another routine delivery, the kind I'd done 1,000 times before. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every time a forklift passed by, every time I caught movement in my peripheral vision, I tensed up. The text message from the unknown number kept replaying in my mind. You shouldn't have taken those papers. Someone knew. Someone was tracking my movements, and I had no idea who they were or when they'd make their move. After the unloading was finished, I signed off on the delivery paperwork and climbed back into my cab. I was supposed to head back to Coos Bay to pick up another load, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. Not yet. I needed answers. I needed to know who was behind this operation and how deep it really went. So instead of heading south, I drove to a quiet spot along the Columbia River, parked my semi in an empty lot, and pulled out the business card Tamsin had given me. The card was simple, just a name, a phone number, and the seal of the Oregon State Police. No rank, no department, just a name. Detective Marcus Freely. I stared at the card for a long time, weighing my options. If I called, I'd be officially involving law enforcement. There'd be no going back. But if I didn't call, I'd be on my own, hunted by people who had no qualms about making problems disappear. I dialed the number. It rang 3 times before a gruff voice answered. Freely. Detective Freely. My name is Cyrus Merritt. Tamsin Crow gave me your number. She said you're investigating drug trafficking along the coast. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Tamsin sent you? Where are you right now? Astoria. I just finished a delivery. Stay where you are. I'll be there in 20 minutes. The line went dead. I sat in the cab, watching the river flow past, trying to calm my racing thoughts. 20 minutes felt like an eternity. I kept checking my mirrors, scanning the parking lot for any sign of movement. But the lot stayed empty. True to his word, Detective Freely pulled up exactly 20 minutes later in an unmarked sedan. He was a tall, lanky man in his late 40s, with close-cropped gray hair and a face that looked like it had seen too many bad days. He was wearing a wrinkled dress shirt and jeans, no tie, and he had the tired, watchful look of someone who'd been working this case for far too long. He climbed into the passenger seat of my cab without asking permission and closed the door behind him. Cyrus Merritt? I nodded. He pulled out a badge and showed it to me briefly before tucking it back into his jacket. Tamsin sent me the photos of the manifests you found. I've been cross-referencing them with our database, and you stumbled onto something big, real big. He pulled out a tablet and swiped through several files. Olin Petgrave's been on our radar for about 8 months now. We suspected he was facilitating illegal shipments, but we didn't have hard evidence. Those manifests you found? They're exactly what we needed to tie him directly to the operation. I felt a small measure of relief. So you can arrest him? Freely shook his head. Not yet. Olin's just a middleman. If we take him down now, the people running the operation will scatter, and we'll lose our chance to dismantle the whole network. What we need is to follow the chain all the way up. Find out who's importing the drugs, who's distributing them, and who's bankrolling the whole thing. He turned to look at me. And that's where you come in. My stomach dropped. What do you mean? Tamsin told me about the detour, the abandoned building, the masked figures. They were testing you, seeing if you'd take the bait, which means they're interested in you for some reason. Maybe they think you're corruptible. Maybe they want to recruit you. Either way, they're watching you, and that gives us an opportunity. I didn't like where this was going. You want me to go undercover? Pretend to work for them? Freely leaned back in the seat. Not exactly. I want you to keep doing what you're doing, making deliveries, following your routes. But I also want you to keep your eyes open. If they approach you again, if they try to recruit you or involve you in their operation, I want you to play along. Gather information. Record conversations if you can. Help us build a case from the inside. I shook my head. You're asking me to put a target on my back. These people already threatened me. They sent me a text last night saying I shouldn't have taken those manifests. If I start playing spy, they'll kill me. Freely's expression hardened. They might kill you anyway, Merritt. You've already seen too much. The only way you're going to stay alive is if we take them down before they get to you. And the fastest way to do that is with your help. I stared out the windshield, watching the rain start to fall again. What if I say no? Then you're on your own. No protection, no support, no way to know when they're coming for you, and trust me, they will come. These people don't leave loose ends. He was right, and I knew it. I was already a target. The only question was whether I'd go down fighting or go down cowering. What do you need me to do? I asked quietly. Freely pulled out a small device from his jacket, about the size of a deck of cards. This is a GPS tracker. I want you to install it somewhere on your truck where it won't be easily found. Under the chassis, inside the wheel well, somewhere like that. It'll let us monitor your movements in real time. If you get into trouble, we'll know where you are. He handed me the device, and I turned it over in my hands. It was heavier than it looked, with a magnetic base and a small blinking LED. What else? If they contact you again, record the conversation. Use your phone, a voice recorder, whatever you've got. And if they ask you to make a delivery that seems off, wrong destination, unusual cargo, strange pickup times, call me immediately. Don't try to handle it yourself. I nodded and tucked the tracker into my jacket. And what if they figure out I'm working with you? Freely's expression softened slightly. Then you call me, and we pull you out. We'll get you into witness protection, relocate you, give you a new identity if we have to. But it won't come to that. You're smart, Merritt. You've already proven that by finding those manifests. Just keep your head down, follow your instincts, and trust me when I say we've got your back. He climbed out of the cab and paused at the door. One more thing. Don't tell anyone about this. Not your dispatcher, not your friends, not even Tamsin. The fewer people who know you're working with us, the safer you'll be. He closed the door and walked back to his sedan, leaving me alone in the cab with the GPS tracker and a sinking feeling in my gut. I spent the next hour installing the tracker, crawling under my semi in the rain to find a secure spot inside the frame near the rear axle. It was cold, miserable work, and by the time I was finished, I was soaked to the bone and shivering. But the tracker was in place, hidden from view, blinking its steady green light. I climbed back into the cab and called my dispatcher, letting her know I was ready for my next assignment. She gave me a new pickup, another load of processed seafood, this time from a plant just south of Tillamook, bound for Seattle. I took the job and headed south, back down US 101, retracing the same route I'd driven just days before. The rain had let up slightly, but the wind was still howling, buffeting my semi as I navigated the curves and switchbacks. I kept checking my mirrors, looking for any sign that I was being followed, but the road behind me stayed empty. I reached the processing plant in Tillamook just after dark and backed into the loading bay. The crew was waiting, and they loaded the pallets quickly and efficiently. I verified the manifest, signed off on the cargo, and was back on the road within 30 minutes. Everything seemed normal. Too normal. I was halfway to Portland when my phone rang. Unknown number. I hesitated, then answered. Hello? There was silence on the other end for a few seconds. Then a voice, distorted and mechanical, like it was being run through a voice changer. Cyrus Merritt, we need to talk. My blood ran cold. Who is this? You know who this is. You've been asking questions, poking around where you don't belong, and now you've made yourself a problem. I tightened my grip on the wheel. I haven't done anything. I'm just a driver. The voice laughed, a harsh, grating sound. You took something that didn't belong to you, and you showed it to people you shouldn't have. That was a mistake. I don't know what you're talking about. I lied. Yes, you do. And here's what's going to happen. You're going to keep your mouth shut. You're going to forget everything you saw at that building. And you're going to stay out of our business. If you do that, we'll forget about you. If you don't... The voice trailed off, letting the threat hang in the air. If I don't, I asked, then we'll make sure you can't talk to anyone. Ever again. The line went dead. I pulled over to the shoulder, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone. I sat there for a long moment, trying to calm my racing heart, trying to think. They knew I'd taken the manifests. They knew I'd shown them to someone. Which meant they were either watching me or they had someone on the inside feeding them information. Either way, I was in serious danger. I pulled out my phone and dialed Detective Freely's number. He answered on the first ring. Merritt, what's wrong? I just got a call. Anonymous, voice distorted. They know I took the manifests and they threatened me. There was a pause on Freely's end. What exactly did they say? I repeated the conversation word for word. When I finished, Freely let out a long breath. Okay. Listen to me carefully. Do not deviate from your route. Do not stop anywhere except for fuel. Drive straight to Seattle, make your delivery, and then find a safe place to park. I'm going to send a unit to keep an eye on you until we figure out our next move. What if they come after me before then? I asked. Then you call 911. You don't try to handle it yourself, you understand? I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. Yeah, I understand. Good. Stay sharp, Merritt. We're going to get through this. He hung up, and I sat there in the darkness, listening to the hum of the engine and the patter of rain on the roof. I'd never felt more alone in my life. I pulled back onto the highway and continued north, my eyes constantly scanning the road ahead and behind. Every set of headlights that appeared in my mirrors made my heart race. Every car that passed me felt like a potential threat. I was a wreck by the time I reached the outskirts of Portland, my nerves frayed and my mind exhausted from constant vigilance. That's when I noticed the car. It was a dark SUV, staying about 3 car lengths behind me, matching my speed exactly. I'd first seen it about 20 miles back, and it hadn't deviated from my tail since. I tried changing lanes. The SUV changed lanes too. I sped up. The SUV sped up. I slowed down. The SUV slowed down. They were following me. And they weren't even trying to hide it. I grabbed my phone and called Freely again. There's a car tailing me. Dark SUV. Been on me for the past 20 miles. Can you see the license plate? I checked my mirror. Too dark, and they're hanging back just far enough that I can't make it out. Okay, keep driving. I'm going to route a state patrol unit to your location. They'll intercept the SUV and see what's going on. Just stay calm and keep moving. I hung up and focused on the road, my knuckles white on the wheel. The SUV stayed behind me, a constant, menacing presence. Minutes ticked by, feeling like hours. Then, finally, I saw flashing blue and red lights in my rearview mirror. A state patrol car was coming up fast, closing the distance between me and the SUV. The patrol car pulled in behind the SUV, lights blazing, and the SUV immediately veered off onto an exit ramp, disappearing into the night. The patrol car followed, and within seconds, both vehicles were gone. I let out a shaky breath and kept driving. My phone rang a few minutes later. It was Freely. We lost them. The SUV took a series of side roads and disappeared before our unit could catch up. But we got a partial plate. We're running it now. What does that mean? I asked. It means whoever's following you is professional. They know how to avoid detection, which tells me this isn't some small-time operation. These people have resources, training, and connections. You need to be even more careful from here on out. I reached Seattle around midnight and made my delivery without incident. After I'd unloaded and signed off on the paperwork, I found a quiet truck stop on the outskirts of the city and parked in a well-lit spot near the entrance. I locked the doors, climbed into the sleeper berth, and tried to get some rest. But sleep wouldn't come. Every sound outside the cab made me jump. Every passing car made me reach for my phone. I was living in a constant state of fear, and I didn't know how much longer I could keep it up. Around 3 a.m, I heard a knock on the cab door. I bolted upright, heart hammering, and grabbed the hunting knife I'd stashed under the seat. "Who is it?" I called out. "It's me, Tamsin." I peered through the window and saw her standing outside, her EMT jacket soaked from the rain. I unlocked the door and let her in. She climbed into the cab, dripping water onto the floor, and sat down in the passenger seat. "What are you doing here?" I asked. Freely told me what happened, the phone call, the SUV. "I wanted to check on you." I set the knife down and leaned back against the seat. "I'm fine, just on edge." Tamsin studied me for a moment, her expression concerned. "You're not fine, Cyrus. You're terrified, and you have every right to be. These people are dangerous. Then why are you helping Freely? Why are you risking your life for this?" She looked out the window, watching the rain streak down the glass. "Because I've seen what these drugs do to people. I've responded to overdoses, watched people die in the back of my ambulance, held the hands of parents who lost their kids to fentanyl, and I couldn't just stand by and do nothing. So when Freely approached me and asked for help documenting the operation, I said yes, even though I knew it was dangerous, even though I knew it might get me killed." She turned back to me. "You're doing the right thing, Cyrus. I know it doesn't feel like it right now, but you are. And we're going to stop these people. I promise you that." I wanted to believe her, but all I could think about was the voice on the phone, the SUV in my mirrors, the endless miles of highway stretching out ahead of me with no safe place to hide. "What if we can't stop them?" I asked quietly. Tamsin reached over and squeezed my shoulder. "Then at least we tried, and that's more than most people can say." She stayed with me for another hour, and we talked about everything and nothing. Her work as a paramedic, my years on the road, the lives we'd lived before all of this started. It was the first time in days that I felt even remotely normal. When she finally left, climbing back out into the rain with the promise to stay in touch, I felt a little less alone, but the fear was still there, lurking in the back of my mind, waiting for the next phone call, the next threat, the next move in a game I didn't know how to win. The next 2 weeks were the longest of my life. I kept driving my routes, picking up loads in Coos Bay and Tillamook and Newport, delivering them to Seattle and Portland and Astoria. Every day felt like walking a tightrope over a pit of knives. I installed the GPS tracker Detective Freely had given me, and I knew somewhere, someone was watching my every move. But I didn't know if it was just Freely and his team, or if the people running the drug operation had found a way to tap into that signal too. I checked my truck obsessively, under the chassis, inside the wheel wells, behind the dashboard. I was looking for bugs, trackers, anything that might indicate I was being monitored. I never found anything, but that didn't make me feel safer. It just made me more paranoid. The anonymous phone calls stopped after that first one, but that was almost worse. The silence felt like the calm before a storm, like they were waiting for the right moment to strike. I kept Freely updated on every delivery, every conversation, every strange look I got from dock workers or plant supervisors. But nothing seemed out of the ordinary. It was like the entire operation had gone dark, waiting me out. Then, 3 weeks after my conversation with Freely, I got a call from my dispatcher. She had a new assignment for me, a rush delivery, pickup in Newport, destination in Astoria. The cargo was listed as processed crab, and the client was willing to pay double the usual rate if I could get it there within 12 hours. It was unusual, but not unheard of. Rush deliveries happened, especially when a client had a tight deadline or a last-minute order to fill. I told her I'd take it and headed south toward Newport, my gut telling me something was off but my mind unable to pinpoint exactly what. I reached the Newport docks just after dark, the fog rolling in thick off the ocean, turning the streetlights into hazy orbs of yellow light. The pickup location was at a smaller dock on the far side of the harbor, away from the main processing plants. I'd been there once before, years ago, and I remembered it as a quiet, almost forgotten corner of the waterfront. I backed my semi into the loading area and killed the engine. The dock was deserted. No workers, no forklifts, no lights in the warehouse windows. Just my truck, the fog, and the sound of waves lapping against the pilings. I climbed out of the cab and walked toward the warehouse, my flashlight cutting through the mist. The door was unlocked, hanging slightly ajar. I pushed it open and called out, "Hello? Anyone here?" No response. I stepped inside, sweeping my flashlight across the interior. The warehouse was empty. No cargo, no equipment, nothing but bare concrete floors and rusted metal shelves. My pulse quickened. This was wrong, very wrong. I turned to leave, but before I could take 2 steps, the warehouse door slammed shut behind me. I spun around and saw 3 figures standing between me and the exit. They were wearing dark clothing, their faces obscured by shadows and the fog that had crept in through the gaps in the walls. One of them stepped forward, and I recognized the yellow rain slicker immediately. It was the same person, or at least the same outfit, that had led me to the abandoned building weeks ago. "Cyrus Merritt," the figure said, their voice muffled by a mask. "We've been waiting for you." I backed up slowly, my hand reaching for the hunting knife on my belt. "What do you want?" The figure tilted their head. "You've been causing problems, asking questions, talking to people you shouldn't be talking to. We gave you a chance to walk away, but you didn't take it. So now, we need to make sure you understand the consequences." One of the other figures moved to the side, and I saw they were holding something. A metal pipe, maybe, or a crowbar. My heart was hammering so hard I could barely think. "I haven't told anyone anything," I lied. "I took your advice. I stayed out of it." The figure in the yellow slicker laughed. "You're a terrible liar, Merritt. We know you met with the state police. We know you gave them the manifests. We know you've been working with them." My blood ran cold. They knew. They knew everything. Which meant someone on the inside, someone close to Freely, or maybe even Freely himself, had leaked the information. Or maybe they'd been tracking me all along, listening to my phone calls, monitoring my movements. "So, what now?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "You kill me? Dump my body in the ocean?" The figure stepped closer. That would be the easy solution, but we're not here to kill you, Merritt. We're here to give you one last chance, a chance to prove you're smart enough to survive. They gestured to one of the other figures, who stepped forward and dropped a duffel bag at my feet. "Open it," the figure in yellow said. I crouched down and unzipped the bag. Inside were bricks, dozens of them, wrapped in plastic and duct tape. I didn't need to open one to know what they were. Drugs. Probably fentanyl or heroin, packaged and ready for distribution. I zipped the bag shut and stood up. "You want me to deliver this?" It wasn't a question. "That's right. You're going to take that bag, load it into your truck, and deliver it to an address we'll give you. You do that and we'll forget about your little indiscretions. You'll be part of the operation, and as long as you keep your mouth shut and do what you're told, you'll be safe. You'll even make good money." I stared at the bag, my mind racing. If I refused, they'd kill me, right here, right now. But if I agreed, if I took the drugs and made the delivery, I'd be crossing a line I could never come back from. I'd be complicit in the very thing I'd been trying to stop. And Freely would know. The GPS tracker under my truck would show exactly where I went, and he'd see me making a delivery to an address that wasn't on any legitimate manifest. He'd think I'd turned. He'd think I'd sold out. Unless I could use this. Use the delivery as bait. Lead Freely and his team right to the heart of the operation. It was risky, insanely risky, but it might be my only chance to end this. "Fine," I said. "I'll do it." The figure in yellow nodded. "Smart choice. The address is already programmed into your GPS. You have 6 hours to make the delivery. If you're late, or if you try anything stupid, we'll know, and we'll come for you. Understood?" I nodded and picked up the duffel bag. It was heavier than I expected, and the weight of it felt like a physical burden pressing down on my shoulders. I walked past the figures and out of the warehouse, into the fog and the cold night air. I loaded the bag into the hidden compartment under my sleeper berth, the one I usually used for tools and spare parts. Then I climbed into the cab and started the engine. The GPS on my dashboard flickered to life, and a new destination appeared. An address in a small town just south of Astoria, about 90 miles north. I pulled out of the dock and onto the highway, my hands trembling on the wheel. As soon as I was clear of the waterfront, I grabbed my phone and called Freely. He answered immediately. "Merritt, where are you?" "Newport. They just gave me a bag full of drugs and told me to deliver it. They know about you. They know I've been working with you." There was a sharp intake of breath on Freely's end. "Are you compromised? Are they listening to this call?" "I don't think so, but I can't be sure." "Okay, listen. Do not make that delivery. Pull over right now, and I'll send a unit to pick you up. We'll get you into protective custody." I shook my head, even though he couldn't see me. "No, I'm going to make the delivery. I'm going to lead you right to them." "That's too dangerous. If they suspect you're setting them up, they already suspect me," I interrupted. "This is the only way. You follow the GPS tracker, you set up surveillance at the delivery location, and you catch them in the act. It's the best shot we're going to get." There was a long silence on Freely's end, then, "Okay, but you stay in your truck, you make the drop, and you leave immediately. You do not engage with anyone. You do not try to be a hero. You understand?" "I understand." "We'll have units positioned around the area. The moment you leave, we move in. Just be careful, Merritt." I hung up and focused on the road, my heart pounding in my chest. The drive to the delivery location took just under 2 hours. The address led me to a cluster of industrial buildings on the outskirts of a small coastal town, the kind of place that had probably thrived in the fishing boom decades ago, but now felt abandoned and forgotten. I pulled into the lot and parked near a corrugated metal warehouse. The lot was empty except for a single black van parked near the loading dock. I grabbed the duffel bag from the sleeper berth and climbed out of the cab. The fog was even thicker here, rolling in off the ocean in dense waves that swallowed everything beyond 20 feet. I walked toward the van, my boots crunching on gravel. The back doors swung open as I approached, and a man stepped out. He was tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a heavy coat and gloves. His face was partially obscured by a scarf, but I could see his eyes, cold, calculating, watching my every move. "You're late," he said. I held up the duffel bag. Traffic was bad. He took the bag from me and unzipped it, inspecting the contents. After a moment, he nodded. "Good. You did well, Merritt. Welcome to the team." I forced myself to nod. "So, what now?" The man zipped the bag shut and tossed it into the van. "Now you go back to your normal runs. We'll contact you when we need you again. And remember, keep your mouth shut. You're part of this now. If you talk, you die. Simple as that." I turned and walked back to my truck, every step feeling like it took an eternity. I climbed into the cab, started the engine, and pulled out of the lot, forcing myself to drive slowly, to act like everything was normal. As soon as I was a mile down the road, I heard sirens in the distance. I checked my rearview mirror and saw flashing blue and red lights converging on the warehouse. Freely had made his move. I kept driving, my hand shaking, my mind numb. I didn't know if the raid had been successful, if they'd caught everyone involved, or if some of them had escaped. I didn't know if Olin Petgrave had been arrested, or if the people higher up the chain were still out there. All I knew was that I'd done my part. I'd led them to the delivery location, and now it was out of my hands. I drove back to Coos Bay in a daze, barely registering the miles ticking by. When I finally pulled into my usual truck stop, I parked in a far corner of the lot, killed the engine, and just sat there, staring at nothing. My phone rang about an hour later. It was Freely. "We got them," he said. "The raid was a success. We arrested 4 people at the warehouse, including the guy you handed the bag to. We also seized over 200 pounds of fentanyl and heroin. This is huge, Merritt. You did it." I should have felt relieved, triumphant even, but all I felt was exhausted. "What about Olin?" I asked. "We arrested him this morning. He's being charged with conspiracy to distribute controlled substances, among other things. He's looking at 20 years minimum." "And the people higher up?" "The ones running the operation." Freely hesitated. "We're still working on that. Some of the suspects we arrested are cooperating, giving us names and locations, but it's going to take time to dismantle the entire network. These things always do." I closed my eyes. "So it's not over." "Not yet, but we dealt them a major blow, and that's because of you." I didn't respond. What was there to say? "Merritt, I know this has been hard on you, but you did the right thing. You saved lives, a lot of lives." "Yeah," I said quietly. "I know." I hung up and sat there in the darkness, listening to the hum of the refrigeration unit in the truck parked next to mine. I thought about Tamsin, about her promise that we'd stop these people. I thought about the manifests, the abandoned building, the masked figures in the fog, and I thought about how close I'd come to being just another casualty in a war I'd never asked to be part of. The next morning, I got a text from Tamsin. It was short and to the point. "Heard about the raid. You okay?" I typed back, "Yeah, I'm okay." But I wasn't sure if that was true. Over the next few days, I kept expecting something to happen. A phone call, a visit, some sign that the people Freely hadn't caught were coming for me. But nothing did. The days turned into weeks, and slowly life started to return to something resembling normal. I went back to my regular routes, hauling seafood up and down the coast, trying to put the whole ordeal behind me. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was still being watched. Every time I drove past the Newport docks, I thought about Olin Petgrave, sitting in a jail cell, probably blaming me for his arrest. Every time I passed a way station or a processing plant, I wondered if someone else had taken his place, if the operation was already rebuilding itself in the shadows. And every time I saw a car following me for more than a few miles, my heart rate spiked, and I reached for my phone, ready to call freely. One night, about 2 months after the raid, I stopped at a rest area just south of Tillamook to grab some sleep. I was exhausted, my body aching from a long day of driving, and I fell asleep almost as soon as I climbed into the sleeper berth. I woke up a few hours later to the sound of someone knocking on my cab door. I sat up, disoriented, and peered through the window. It was Tamsin. She was standing outside in the rain, her EMT jacket soaked, her expression tense. I unlocked the door and let her in. "What are you doing here?" I asked. She climbed into the cab and closed the door behind her. "I needed to see you. To warn you." My stomach dropped. Warn me about what? Tamsin pulled out her phone and showed me a photo. It was a screenshot of a text message sent from an unknown number. "Tamsin Crow, we know what you did. We're coming for you." I stared at the message, my blood running cold. "When did you get this?" 2 days ago. And I've been getting them every night since. Always from a different number, always the same message. Freely thinks it's just scare tactics, that they're trying to intimidate me into backing off. But I don't think so. I think they're serious. She looked at me, her eyes filled with fear. And if they're coming for me, they're coming for you too. I thought about the GPS tracker under my truck, about the delivery I'd made, about all the people who knew I'd cooperated with the police. "What do we do?" I asked. Tamsin shook her head. "I don't know. Freely says he can offer us protection, but that only lasts as long as the investigation is active. Once the trials are over, once the cases are closed, we're on our own. And these people, they don't forget. They don't forgive." We sat there in silence for a long moment, the rain drumming on the roof of the cab. "Maybe we should disappear," I said quietly. "Change our names. Move somewhere far away. Start over." Tamsin looked out the window, watching the rain streak down the glass. "Maybe, but is that really living? Always looking over our shoulder, always waiting for them to find us?" I didn't have an answer. Because she was right. There was no escaping this. Not really. We'd seen too much, done too much. We were marked now, whether we stayed or ran. "I'm sorry I got you into this," I said. Tamsin turned to look at me, and for the first time since I'd met her, she smiled. It was a sad, tired smile, but it was genuine. "You didn't get me into anything, Cyrus. I chose this, just like you did, and I'd make the same choice again." She reached over and squeezed my hand. We did the right thing, even if it cost us everything. She left a few minutes later, disappearing into the rain, and I sat alone in the cab, staring at my phone, waiting for the next message, the next threat, the next move in a game that never seemed to end. I still drive the coastal routes. I still pick up loads in Newport and Coos Bay and Tillamook, still deliver them to Seattle and Portland and Astoria. But everything's different now. I check my mirrors obsessively. I vary my routes, never taking the same road twice in a row. I keep the hunting knife close, and I sleep with one eye open. I don't know if the people running the operation are still out there, rebuilding in the shadows, or if Freely's raid really did dismantle the network. I don't know if Olin Petgrave is cooperating with investigators or keeping his mouth shut, protecting the people higher up the chain. I don't know if the masked figures I saw in the warehouse are in jail, or if they're still out there waiting for the right moment to come for me. All I know is that I can't stop driving. Because if I stop, if I let the fear paralyze me, then they've already won. So I keep moving. Mile after mile, day after day, the highway stretching out ahead of me like a promise that never quite delivers. I pass the exit for that abandoned building sometimes, the one where I found the manifests. I never take it, I just keep driving, my hands tight on the wheel, my eyes on the road. And every night before I fall asleep, I check my phone, looking for messages, looking for threats, looking for some sign that it's finally over. But the messages never come. The threats never materialize. And that's the worst part, because not knowing is worse than knowing. The uncertainty is worse than any threat. It's the silence that kills you. The waiting. The constant gnawing fear that one day you'll turn a corner, or stop at a rest area, or open your cab door, and they'll be there. Waiting. I got one more text from Tamsin about 3 weeks ago. It was short. Still here, still fighting. Don't give up. I typed back, I won't. But I don't know if that's true. Because every day feels like a battle, and I'm not sure how much longer I can keep fighting. The coast is beautiful, especially in the early morning when the fog lifts and the sun breaks through the clouds, painting the ocean in shades of gold and silver. But I don't see the beauty anymore. I only see the shadows, the places where someone could be hiding, the roads that lead to nowhere, the trucks that follow me for just a few miles too long. I'm still driving, but I don't know for how much longer, because sooner or later the road runs out, and when it does, I'll have to face whatever's waiting for me at the end. I just hope I'm ready when that day comes, but deep down, I know I won't be, because you're never ready for the things that haunt you in the dark. You just learn to live with them. Until you can't anymore. My name is Orson Whitlock, and I've been hauling freight through the Idaho Panhandle for going on 12 years now. Most people don't think much about Idaho when they picture trucking routes. They think of the interstates, the flat corridors that cut through the heartland, the easy miles where you can set the cruise control and let your mind wander. But up here in the Panhandle, trucking is a different animal altogether. US 95 runs north to south through some of the most unforgiving terrain in the Pacific Northwest, dense forests, steep mountain passes, stretches of highway where cell service disappears for 30 miles at a stretch. In winter, the road becomes a gauntlet of black ice and whiteout conditions. In summer, the heat can warp the asphalt and turn your cab into an oven. And year-round, you're dealing with wildlife, rock slides, and weather systems that can change in the span of 15 minutes. I've seen it all. I've chained up in blizzards so thick I couldn't see my own hood. I've navigated around elk carcasses the size of small cars. I've white-knuckled my way down grades so steep that my brakes started smoking, and I had to pull over to let them cool. The Panhandle doesn't forgive mistakes, and it doesn't care how experienced you think you are. You respect the road, or the road will kill you. What happened to me last February taught me that the road isn't always the most dangerous thing out here. Sometimes, the real threat comes from the people who are supposed to help you. It was a Tuesday night, late enough that most of the world had gone to bed, but early enough that I still had hours of driving ahead of me. I was hauling a load of agricultural equipment from Lewiston up to Bonner's Ferry, a run I'd done maybe 50 times before. The weather forecast had called for light snow, nothing unusual for February in northern Idaho. But as I climbed into the higher elevations, the snow started coming down harder than expected. Fat, wet flakes that stuck to the windshield faster than my wipers could clear them. Visibility dropped to maybe 100 feet, and I slowed down to 35 miles per hour, hazards flashing, gripping the wheel tight. The highway was deserted. I hadn't seen another vehicle in over an hour, which wasn't uncommon for this stretch of US 95 late at night. Most of the traffic up here is local: ranchers, loggers, the occasional tourist who got lost trying to find Coeur d'Alene. Commercial trucks like mine were few and far between, especially in weather like this. I was about 40 miles south of Sandpoint when I came around a curve and saw something that made my heart skip a beat. There was a vehicle in the ditch on the right side of the road. It was a pickup truck, nose down in the snow, rear end jutting up at an awkward angle. The headlights were still on, cutting through the falling snow, and the driver's door was hanging open. I tapped my brakes and slowed to a crawl, scanning the area for any sign of the driver. Nothing. Just the truck, the snow, and the dark forest pressing in on both sides of the highway. I pulled over onto the shoulder about 50 feet past the wreck and killed my engine. For a moment, I just sat there, weighing my options. Common sense said to call 911 and keep driving. Let the professionals handle it. But I'd been on the receiving end of help more than once in my years on the road. Drivers who'd stop to give me a jump or a tow or just a thermos of hot coffee when I was stranded in the cold. Helping each other out was part of the code. You don't leave someone stranded if you can do something about it. I grabbed my flashlight and climbed out of the cab, pulling my coat tight against the wind. The cold hit me like a slap, the kind of bone-deep chill that makes you realize just how isolated you are. I walked back towards the pickup, my boots crunching in the snow, my breath coming out in white puffs. The truck was a late-model Ford, dark blue, with Montana plates. The front end was buried in the snowbank, and I could see spiderweb cracks in the windshield where something, maybe the driver's head, had impacted the glass. But there was no blood, no sign of injury, just the open door and the still-running engine. I called out, my voice swallowed by the wind. "Hello? Anyone here? You okay?" No response. I swept my flashlight across the interior of the truck. The cab was empty. Keys still in the ignition, a half-empty coffee cup in the center console, a phone sitting on the passenger seat. Whoever had been driving had left in a hurry or been taken. I walked around the truck looking for footprints, any sign of where the driver had gone. That's when I found them, a set of tracks leading away from the truck, heading into the forest. They were fresh, barely filled in with snow, and they looked unsteady, like the person had been stumbling or disoriented. I stood there for a moment, torn between the urge to follow the tracks and the instinct to stay put and call for help. But if someone was out there in the woods, injured and confused, they might not have much time. The temperature was dropping fast, and hypothermia could set in within an hour in conditions like this. I made a decision. I pulled out my phone and dialed 911. No service. I walked back to my truck and tried the CB radio, broadcasting on the emergency channel. "This is Orson Whitlock, mile marker 187 on US 95 northbound. I've got a vehicle in the ditch, driver missing, footprints leading into the woods. Requesting assistance. Over." Static. I tried again. Same result. The storm was interfering with the signal, or I was too far out in the middle of nowhere for anyone to hear me. I was on my own. I grabbed a spare jacket from my sleeper berth, along with a first aid kit and a length of rope. If I was going to follow those tracks, I needed to be prepared. I locked my truck and started into the woods, following the footprints, my flashlight cutting through the darkness. The forest was dense, the trees so tightly packed that the snow hadn't penetrated much beyond the first few yards. The tracks led deeper, weaving between trunks and over fallen logs, and I followed them as quickly as I dared. The wind howled through the branches above, and every now and then I'd hear a crack or a rustle that made me stop and sweep my flashlight around, half expecting to see something watching me from the shadows. After about 10 minutes, the tracks ended at a small clearing. And in the middle of that clearing was a man. He was lying on his back in the snow, motionless. His arms spread out like he'd just collapsed. I ran over and knelt beside him, pressing my fingers to his neck. He had a pulse, weak and thready, but there, his skin was ice cold, his lips tinged blue. Hypothermia, no question. I shook him gently. "Hey, can you hear me? I'm here to help." His eyes fluttered open, unfocused, and he mumbled something I couldn't make out. I pulled the spare jacket over him and started rubbing his arms, trying to generate some warmth. "What's your name?" I asked. "What happened?" He blinked a few times and his eyes seemed to focus on me. Ran me off the road," he whispered. They're coming back." I froze. "Who ran you off the road?" He grabbed my wrist, his grip surprisingly strong for someone on the edge of hypothermia. Don't trust the deputy. He's one of them." Before I could ask what he meant, I heard the sound of an engine in the distance. A vehicle approaching from the direction of the highway. I looked back through the trees and saw headlights cutting through the snow. Someone had stopped at the wrecked truck. I turned back to the man. "Can you walk?" He shook his head weakly. "Too cold. Can't feel my legs." I cursed under my breath and looked around. The clearing was small, surrounded by dense forest. If I tried to carry him back to the highway, whoever had just arrived would see us. And if what this man was saying was true, if someone had deliberately run him off the road, then walking back into the open might be the last mistake I ever made. I made a split-second decision. I dragged the man behind a fallen log at the edge of the clearing, laying him down as gently as I could and covering him with the jacket. "Stay quiet," I whispered. "I'm going to check who that is. If it's safe, I'll come back for you." He nodded weakly, his eyes already starting to close again. I crept back through the trees, moving as quietly as I could until I had a clear view of the highway. A county sheriff's cruiser was parked behind the wrecked pickup, its lights flashing red and blue. A man in uniform was standing beside the truck, shining a flashlight into the cab. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with a thick mustache and a no-nonsense demeanor. He looked official, professional, exactly like someone you'd trust in an emergency. But the man in the clearing had said not to trust the deputy, that he was one of them, whoever them was. I watched as the deputy walked around the truck, examining the scene. He pulled out his radio and said something I couldn't hear, then walked over to the edge of the road and looked into the woods, right where my footprints led. My heart sank. He'd see the tracks. He'd follow them. And if he was part of whatever had forced that man off the road, then I'd just led him straight to both of us. I needed to move, fast. I turned and ran back to the clearing, stumbling over roots and branches in my haste. The man was still where I'd left him, shivering violently now, his skin even paler than before. "The deputy's here," I said, crouching beside him. "He's going to follow my tracks. We need to move." The man's eyes widened. "No, not him. He'll kill us both." I didn't know if he was delirious or telling the truth, but I couldn't take the chance. I grabbed him under the arms and hauled him to his feet, slinging one of his arms over my shoulder. He was heavier than he looked, dead weight, his legs barely able to support him. We stumbled deeper into the woods, moving as fast as I could manage. The sound of my own labored breathing loud in my ears. Behind us, I heard a shout. The deputy had found the tracks. "Hello? Anyone out here? This is Deputy Hobart Keene with the County Sheriff's Office. If you need help, call out." I kept moving, half dragging the man through the snow, my legs burning with the effort. We pushed through a thicket of brush and emerged onto a narrow logging road, barely visible under the snow. I stopped to catch my breath, my lungs aching from the cold air. The man slumped against me, his head lolling. Where are we going?" he mumbled. "I don't know," I admitted. "Somewhere away from him." I heard footsteps crunching through the snow behind us, getting closer. The deputy was following our trail, and he was moving fast. I looked down the logging road, trying to decide which direction to go. Left led deeper into the forest away from the highway. Right curved back toward the road, but at a different point. Either way, we were running out of time. I made a choice and turned left, hauling the man along with me. We stumbled down the logging road for maybe 200 yards before I saw it, a small cabin, tucked into the trees, its windows dark and its roof sagging under the weight of snow. It looked abandoned, but right now, abandoned was exactly what I needed. I dragged the man up onto the porch and tried the door. Locked. I stepped back and kicked it hard, just above the handle. The wood splintered and the door swung open. I pulled the man inside and closed the door behind us, wedging a chair under the handle to keep it shut. The interior of the cabin was freezing, not much warmer than outside, but at least we were out of the wind. I lowered the man onto a dusty couch in the corner and started looking for anything we could use: blankets, matches, firewood. I found a stack of old newspapers and a box of matches on a shelf, along with a few pieces of split wood stacked beside a potbelly stove in the corner. I got a fire started, feeding it newspaper until the kindling caught, then adding the wood. Within minutes, the stove was radiating heat, and I pulled the couch closer so the man could warm up. "You're going to be okay," I said, more to convince myself than him. "We'll wait here until morning, then figure out how to get help." The man opened his eyes and looked at me. "You don't understand. There is no help, not out here. The deputy, Hobart Keene, he's been running this whole thing. Him and the wrecker operator, they've been doing it for years." I stared at him. "Doing what?" He swallowed hard, his voice barely above a whisper. "Staging accidents, running people off the road. Then the wrecker comes, and they disappear. No one ever sees them again." My blood ran cold. "What are you talking about? Why would they—" "Money," the man interrupted. "Cargo. People traveling through, no one local, no one who'll be missed right away. They hit them, take whatever's worth taking and make it look like an accident. Sometimes they dump the bodies in the woods. Sometimes they just— I don't know. I got lucky. I fought back. Managed to get away before they could finish the job." Before I could respond, I heard the crunch of footsteps on the porch outside. The door handle rattled, then a voice. Calm, measured, official. "This is Deputy Hobart Keene. I know you're in there. Come out with your hands up. I'm here to help." I looked at the man on the couch. His face was pale, his eyes filled with terror. "Don't open it," he whispered. "Please. He'll kill us both." I stood there, frozen, the fire crackling in the stove, the deputy's voice echoing through the thin walls, and I realized, with a sinking certainty, that I'd stumbled into something far worse than a simple accident on a snowy road. I'd walked straight into a trap, and now I had no idea how to get out. I stood in the middle of that freezing cabin, listening to Deputy Hobart Keene call out from the other side of the door, and every instinct in my body was screaming at me to answer him, to open the door, to trust the badge, to let the professional handle this. That's what you're supposed to do, right? See a police officer, cooperate, let them sort out the mess. But the man on the couch, bleeding, hypothermic, barely conscious, had been terrified when he'd heard Hobart's name. And the look in his eyes hadn't been the confusion of someone suffering from exposure. It had been recognition. Fear. the kind of fear that comes from knowing exactly what someone is capable of. I made a decision. I walked to the window on the far side of the cabin and peered out through a gap in the boards that had been nailed over it. I could just make out Hobart's cruiser parked at the end of the logging road, its lights still flashing. And standing beside it, illuminated by the headlights, was a second vehicle I hadn't noticed before. A tow truck. Big, heavy-duty, the kind used for pulling semis out of ditches, the kind operated by a wrecker service. My stomach turned. The man on the couch had mentioned a wrecker operator, said they were working together. Hobart called out again, his voice still calm but with an edge of impatience now. "I can see the smoke from your fire. I know you're in there. Just come out and talk to me. Let's get this sorted out before someone freezes to death." I walked back to the couch and crouched beside the injured man. "What's your name?" I whispered. He blinked slowly, struggling to focus. Russell Gaines." "Okay, Russell, I need you to tell me exactly what happened, fast." Russell swallowed and nodded weakly. "I was driving south from Bonner's Ferry, had a load of tools and equipment in the bed of my truck, middle of nowhere late at night, and this cruiser comes up behind me. Lights flashing. I pulled over, figured it was a traffic stop. Deputy gets out, walks up to my window, asks for my license and registration. I gave it to him. His breathing was labored, each word an effort. Then he asks me to step out of the vehicle. I do. And the next thing I know, he's got me face down in the snow, cuffing my hands behind my back. I'm asking him what's going on, and he doesn't say a word, just drags me to the back of his cruiser." Russell paused, his eyes distant. "That's when the tow truck showed up. Big guy, probably 6'4", wearing coveralls. Didn't say his name, didn't have to. The deputy called him by name, Jedediah. They talked for a minute, low enough that I couldn't hear. Then, Jedediah hooked up my truck and started going through it. Took my tools, my equipment, anything worth selling. They were going to take me, too." I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold. "Take you where?" Russell shook his head. "I don't know, but I heard them talking. Something about the usual spot, something about no one comes out here anyway." I managed to get my hands free, the cuffs weren't on tight, and I ran. Made it maybe 100 yards before the deputy started shooting at me. That's when I lost control of my truck and ended up in the ditch. I kept running, figured if I could make it into the woods they'd lose me in the dark. He looked at me, his eyes pleading. "You gotta believe me. This isn't some misunderstanding. These guys are killers. And if you open that door, we're both dead." I believed him. I didn't want to, but I did. Because the alternative, that a county deputy and a wrecker operator were staging accidents and robbing travelers on a remote stretch of highway, was too horrifying to accept. But it made a sick kind of sense. This was the perfect hunting ground. US 95 through the Panhandle was isolated, sparsely populated, with long stretches where you could go an hour without seeing another car. Travelers passing through had no local connections, no one who'd immediately notice if they went missing. And a deputy with a badge and a cruiser, that was the perfect cover. Who questions a cop? I moved back to the window and looked out again. Hobart was still on the porch, but now he was joined by the second man, Jedediah, presumably. Even from a distance I could see he was massive, broad-shouldered and thick-armed, wearing grease-stained coveralls and a heavy jacket. He was holding something in his right hand. I couldn't make out what it was, but the way he held it, low and ready, made my skin crawl. Hobart knocked on the door again, harder this time. "Last chance. Come out now, and we can talk this through. Stay in there, and things are going to get a lot more complicated." I looked around the cabin, searching for options. There was only one door, the one Hobart was standing in front of. The windows were boarded up, probably to keep out the weather, and prying the boards off would take time and make noise. There was no back exit, no crawl space, no way out except through the front. We were trapped. I walked back to Russell. "Can you move at all?" He tried to sit up and winced, his face pale. "I don't know. Maybe, but not fast." I grabbed his arm and helped him to his feet. He swayed, nearly collapsing, but managed to stay upright. "We're going to have to make a run for it," I said. "Out to the back window. We'll pry the boards off, get into the woods, and lose them in the dark." Russell nodded, but his expression was bleak. "They know these woods better than we do, and they've got guns. You have a better idea?" He didn't. I grabbed a heavy iron poker from beside the stove and went to the back window. The boards were nailed in place, but the wood was old and brittle. I wedged the poker under one of the boards and pried. It came loose with a screech of nails pulling free, and I froze, listening. Hobart and Jedediah were talking outside, their voices low. They hadn't heard. I pried off a second board, then a third, until the window was clear. Cold air rushed in and I pushed the window open. It was a tight fit, but we could squeeze through. "Go," I whispered to Russell, helping him toward the window. He climbed through awkwardly, his movements slow and uncoordinated, and dropped into the snow on the other side. I was about to follow when I heard the front door splinter. They were coming in. I didn't think, I just moved. I dove through the window, hit the snow hard, and scrambled to my feet. Russell was already moving, stumbling through the trees, and I grabbed his arm to steady him. Behind us, I heard shouting. Hobart's voice sharp and commanding. "They're running, out the back." We ran, or at least we tried to. Russell could barely stay on his feet, and I was half dragging him through the snow, my boots slipping on the uneven ground. The forest was pitch black, the only light coming from the faint glow of the cabin behind us. I could hear them crashing through the brush, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. I pulled Russell behind a thick stand of trees and pressed a finger to my lips. We crouched there, breathing hard, watching as the beams of light swept back and forth. Hobart's voice echoed through the forest. "You're only making this harder on yourselves. Come out now, and I'll make it quick. Keep running, and you'll freeze to death out here. Is that what you want?" Russell was shaking violently, his teeth chattering. He wouldn't last much longer in this cold. I needed to get him somewhere warm, somewhere safe. But where? My truck was back on the highway miles away by foot, and even if we made it there, Hobart and Jedediah would catch us before we could get the engine started. I thought about the tow truck. If Jedediah had driven it here, that meant the keys might still be in the ignition. If we could make it to the truck, we could use it to get back to the highway. It was a long shot, but it was the only shot we had. "Can you make it a little farther?" I whispered to Russell. He nodded weakly. "I'll try." We moved as quietly as we could, circling wide around the cabin, staying in the shadows. The voices behind us grew fainter, and I realized Hobart and Jedediah were moving deeper into the woods, following the tracks we'd left. They thought we were still running. Good, let them chase ghosts. We reached the edge of the clearing where the vehicles were parked. The tow truck was still there, its engine idling, exhaust puffing into the cold air. Hobart's cruiser sat beside it, lights still flashing. I scanned the area, no sign of Hobart or Jedediah. They were still in the woods. This was our chance. I helped Russell across the clearing, moving as fast as his weakened state would allow. We reached the tow truck, and I pulled open the driver's side door. The keys were in the ignition, just like I'd hoped. I helped Russell into the passenger seat, then climbed in and put the truck in gear. That's when I heard the shout. "Hey, stop!" I looked in the side mirror and saw Jedediah running toward us, his massive frame barreling across the snow. He was holding something now, I could see it clearly in the dome light of the truck. A tire iron. I slammed my foot on the gas, and the tow truck lurched forward. Jedediah reached the driver's side door and grabbed the handle, trying to wrench it open. I swerved hard to the left, and he lost his grip, stumbling back. I didn't slow down. I drove straight down the logging road, the truck bouncing and skidding on the uneven terrain, branches scraping against the sides. In the rearview mirror, I saw Jedediah running after us, then stopping, doubling over with his hands on his knees. He was fast, but he couldn't outrun a truck. Russell slumped in the passenger seat, his eyes half closed. Did we make it? Not yet, I said, gripping the wheel tight. But we're getting there. The logging road merged with another, wider road, and I followed it until I saw the familiar outline of US 95 ahead. I pulled onto the highway and headed north, toward Sandpoint, toward civilization, toward help. My hands were shaking, adrenaline coursing through my veins. I glanced at Russell. You still with me? He nodded weakly. Yeah. Barely. We're going to get you to a hospital, and then we're going to the state police. We're going to tell them everything. Russell didn't respond. He'd passed out, his head lolling against the window. I pushed the tow truck as fast as I dared, the speedometer climbing to 60, then 70. The snow was still falling, but the highway was clearer up here, the plows having made a pass earlier in the evening. I kept checking the mirrors, expecting to see Hobart's cruiser coming up behind me, lights flashing. But the road stayed empty. After about 20 minutes, I saw the lights of Sandpoint in the distance. Relief washed over me, and I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. We'd made it. We'd actually made it. I pulled into the parking lot of the county hospital and laid on the horn, not caring who I woke up. Within seconds, the emergency entrance doors flew open, and 2 nurses in scrubs came running out. I climbed out of the truck and pointed at Russell. He's hypothermic, needs immediate attention. They didn't ask questions. They just got a gurney, loaded Russell onto it, and wheeled him inside. I followed, my legs weak and unsteady. One of the nurses stopped me. Are you injured? I shook my head. No, but I need to use your phone. I need to call the state police. She led me to a desk and handed me a landline. I dialed the number for the Idaho State Police, and a dispatcher answered on the second ring. I told her everything. The wrecked truck, Russell's story, Hobart Keene and Jedediah Pike, the cabin, the chase. She listened without interrupting, then told me to stay where I was. Troopers were on their way. I hung up and sat down in the waiting area, my whole body trembling. It was over. We'd escaped. We'd gotten help. But even as I tried to convince myself of that, a nagging doubt gnawed at the back of my mind. Hobart and Jedediah were still out there, and they knew I could identify them. They knew I'd seen their operation, their vehicles, their faces. As long as they were free, I wasn't safe. The state troopers arrived about 30 minutes later, 2 of them, both in their mid-30s and all business. They took my statement, recorded everything on a digital recorder, and asked me to describe Hobart and Jedediah in as much detail as I could. I told them about Hobart's cruiser, about the tow truck with Jedediah's name on the door, about the cabin and the logging road. They nodded, made notes, and thanked me for my cooperation. Then one of them said something that made my blood run cold. We'll need to verify your story before we can proceed. County Deputy Hobart Keene has been with the sheriff's office for over 15 years. He's well respected in the community. If you're making false accusations, I'm not, I interrupted. Russell Gaines will back me up. He's in there right now, being treated. Ask him. The trooper nodded. We will. But until we have corroborating evidence, we can't just arrest a sitting deputy on your word alone. I'm sure you understand. I didn't understand, not really, but I was too exhausted to argue. They told me to stay in town, to find a motel and get some rest, and that they'd be in touch. Then they left, and I was alone again. I sat in the waiting area for another hour, staring at the wall, replaying everything in my mind. Finally, a doctor came out and told me Russell was stable. They were warming him up, treating him for exposure and minor injuries, but he was going to be okay. I asked if I could see him, and the doctor nodded. Russell was in a bed in the ICU, hooked up to monitors and IV lines. He looked better than he had in the cabin. His color was returning, and his breathing was steady. When he saw me, he managed a weak smile. "You saved my life." I shook my head. "You saved your own life. I just drove the truck." He laughed softly, then winced. "What happens now?" I called the state police, told them everything. They're investigating. Russell's expression darkened. "And what did they say about Hobart?" I hesitated. "They said they need to verify the story, that they can't arrest him without evidence." Russell closed his eyes. "Of course, the Brotherhood. Cops protecting cops, even when one of them's dirty." "They'll figure it out," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "They have to." Russell didn't respond. He just lay there, staring at the ceiling, and I could see the doubt in his eyes. The fear that maybe, just maybe, Hobart and Jedediah would get away with it. I stayed with Russell for a while longer, then left the hospital and checked into a motel on the edge of town. The room was small and dingy, but it had a lock on the door and a phone on the nightstand. I wedged a chair under the doorknob, just like I'd done at the cabin, and sat on the bed with my back against the headboard, staring at the door. I didn't sleep. Every sound in the hallway made me jump. Every set of headlights that passed by the window made me reach for my phone. I kept expecting Hobart or Jedediah to kick down the door, to finish what they'd started. But morning came, and nothing happened. I called the state police again, asking for an update. The trooper I spoke to was polite but non-committal. They were looking into it, he said, following up on leads. They'd let me know if they needed anything else from me. I hung up and stared at the phone, frustration boiling in my chest. I'd given them everything: names, descriptions, locations. What more did they need? I thought about calling my dispatcher, telling her I wouldn't be able to make my delivery to Bonner's Ferry. But I didn't, because part of me, maybe the stubborn part, maybe the stupid part, wanted to finish the job. I'd been hauling freight through the Panhandle for 12 years, and I wasn't going to let two crooked bastards scare me off my route. So I checked out of the motel, drove back to where I'd left my semi on the side of US 95, and climbed into the cab. The truck was right where I'd left it, untouched, covered in a fresh layer of snow. I fired up the engine and pulled back onto the highway, heading north toward Bonner's Ferry. And with every mile I drove, I kept checking my mirrors, waiting for the moment when Hobart Keene's cruiser would appear behind me, waiting for the trap to spring shut. I made it to Bonner's Ferry without incident, delivered my load, and tried to act like everything was normal. The crew at the receiving dock didn't ask why I was late, and I didn't volunteer the information. I just wanted to unload, sign the paperwork, and get back on the road. But normal felt like a lie. Every time a vehicle passed me on the highway, I tensed up. Every time I saw flashing lights in my mirrors, even if it was just a plow truck or a road crew, my heart rate spiked. I kept my CB radio tuned to the emergency channel, listening for chatter, for any sign that the state police had made arrests. Nothing. Just static and the occasional snippet of conversation between truckers comparing road conditions. 2 days after I'd escaped from that cabin, I got a call on my cell phone. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. "Orson Whitlock?" The voice was unfamiliar, male, businesslike. "Yeah, who's this?" "My name's Garrett. I'm an investigator with the Idaho State Police. We need to talk about your statement regarding Deputy Hobart Keene." I pulled over at the next rest area and killed the engine. "What about it?" "We've completed our preliminary investigation. We interviewed Russell Gaines, examined the scene, and reviewed Deputy Keene's service record. Based on the evidence, we're moving forward with charges." Relief flooded through me. "You're arresting him?" "Not yet. We need more evidence to make the charges stick, but we've placed him on administrative leave pending further investigation, and we've issued a warrant to search his property in the wrecker service operated by Jedediah Pike." I let out a breath. "So, you believe us?" There was a pause on the other end. "Let's just say the evidence is compelling. We found Russell Gaines' truck where you said it would be. We found the cabin. We found tire tracks matching Pike's tow truck. And when we ran Keene's financials, we found some irregularities, cash deposits that don't match his salary, purchases that suggest a secondary income stream. It's not a slam dunk, but it's enough to keep digging." "What about Pike?" I asked. "We haven't been able to locate him. His wrecker service has been shut down, and his residence appears to be abandoned. We think he got spooked and ran." My stomach tightened. "So he's still out there?" "For now. But we've issued a BOLO. Be on the lookout. Every agency in the region has his description and vehicle information. He won't get far." I thanked the investigator and hung up, but the relief I'd felt moments earlier had already started to fade. Jedediah Pike was still out there, somewhere, and he knew what I looked like. He knew my truck. He knew my route. I thought about taking some time off, laying low until the investigation wrapped up, but I couldn't afford to. I had bills to pay, a mortgage, a life that required me to keep working. So I kept driving. I took a load from Bonner's Ferry down to Coeur d'Alene, then another from Coeur d'Alene to Lewiston. I varied my routes where I could, avoided stopping in isolated areas, and made sure to park in well-lit, populated truck stops at night. I was careful, but careful only gets you so far when someone's hunting you. It was 3 days later when I saw the tow truck. I was southbound on US 95, about 30 miles north of Moscow, hauling a load of lumber. Traffic was light, just me and a few other vehicles scattered along the highway. I'd been driving for about 6 hours, my mind half on the road and half on the podcast I was listening to, when I glanced in my side mirror and saw it. A tow truck. Big, heavy-duty, the same model as the one Jedediah had been driving. It was about a quarter-mile back, matching my speed, staying just far enough behind that I couldn't make out the driver's face. My pulse quickened. I told myself it was a coincidence. Tow trucks were common on this highway, especially in winter when accidents happened regularly. There was no reason to assume it was Jedediah, but the truck didn't pass me. It didn't fall back. It just stayed there, a constant presence in my mirrors. I tried speeding up. The tow truck sped up. I tried slowing down. The tow truck slowed down. My hands tightened on the wheel. This wasn't a coincidence. I grabbed my phone and dialed the investigator's number. It went to voicemail. I cursed and hung up, then dialed 911. The dispatcher answered, and I explained the situation as calmly as I could. "There's a tow truck following me on US 95 southbound near mile marker 320. I think it's connected to an ongoing investigation involving Jedediah Pike." The dispatcher asked me to stay on the line and said she was routing a state patrol unit to my location. I kept driving, my eyes flicking between the road ahead and the tow truck behind me. Minutes ticked by. The tow truck started closing the distance, moving up until it was maybe 100 feet behind me, then 50 feet, then right on my bumper. I saw the driver now, silhouetted against the headlights. Broad shoulders, heavy build. It was him, Jedediah Pike. The tow truck surged forward and tapped my rear bumper. Not hard, just enough to jolt me forward and send a spike of adrenaline through my system. He was trying to run me off the road. I floored the accelerator and my semi lurched forward, the engine roaring. But the tow truck kept pace, its heavy frame built for pulling disabled vehicles, more than capable of keeping up with a loaded semi. He tapped me again, harder this time, and I felt the back end of my trailer fishtail slightly. I fought to keep control, my knuckles white on the wheel. The dispatcher's voice crackled through my phone's speaker. "Mr. Whitlock, a unit is en route. ETA 5 minutes. Can you stay on the road?" "I'm trying," I said through gritted teeth. Jedediah pulled into the left lane and came up alongside me. I glanced over and saw him staring at me through his window, his face cold and expressionless. Then he swerved right, slamming the side of his truck into my trailer. Metal screeched, and I felt my semi lurch to the right, the tires skidding on the asphalt. I yanked the wheel left, trying to regain control, but Jedediah hit me again, harder this time. My trailer swung wide, and I felt the horrifying sensation of losing traction, the back end sliding out from under me. I was jackknifing. I hit the brakes, trying to straighten out, but it was too late. The trailer swung all the way around, and my semi slid sideways across both lanes of the highway. I braced for impact, certain I was about to roll. But somehow, miraculously, the truck came to a stop, blocking both lanes, the trailer at a 90-degree angle to the cab. I sat there, breathing hard, my heart hammering in my chest. The tow truck had stopped about 50 feet ahead, its brake lights glowing red in the dim afternoon light. The driver's door opened, and Jedediah Pike stepped out. He was holding a crowbar. I fumbled for my seatbelt, my hands shaking, and threw open the cab door. I didn't have a plan. I just knew I couldn't sit there and wait for him to reach me. I jumped down from the cab and ran toward the shoulder, toward the tree line. Behind me, I heard Jedediah's boots crunching on the asphalt, his footsteps heavy and deliberate. "You should have stayed out of it, Whitlock," he shouted. I didn't look back. I just kept running, my breath coming in ragged gasps, my legs pumping as hard as they could. I reached the tree line and plunged into the forest, branches whipping at my face, roots threatening to trip me with every step. I could hear him behind me, crashing through the brush, gaining on me. I veered left, then right, trying to lose him in the dense undergrowth, but he was faster than I expected, and he knew these woods. I burst into a small clearing and stopped, spinning around, searching for a way out. Jedediah emerged from the trees a moment later, the crowbar gripped in both hands. We stood there, maybe 20 feet apart, both of us breathing hard. "This is over, Pike," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "The state police know everything. They're looking for you. You're done." He laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "I'm done? You're the one who ruined everything. You and that idiot Russell. We had a good thing going, and you two had to stick your noses where they didn't belong." "You were killing people," I said. Jedediah shrugged. "Only the ones who didn't cooperate. Most of them just handed over their valuables and went on their way. But you had to play hero. And now I've got nothing. No business, no partner, no way out." He took a step forward, raising the crowbar. "So I figure, if I'm going down, I might as well take you with me." I backed up, looking for something, anything, I could use as a weapon. My hand closed around a fallen branch, thick and heavy. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. Jedediah charged. I swung the branch with everything I had, catching him across the shoulder. He grunted and stumbled, but didn't go down. He swung the crowbar and I ducked, feeling the wind as it passed over my head. We grappled, both of us fighting for control, slipping in the snow and mud. He was stronger than me, and he was winning. He shoved me backward and I tripped over a root, falling hard onto my back. The impact knocked the wind out of me, and I lay there gasping, staring up at Jedediah as he raised the crowbar over his head. And that's when I heard the sirens. Jedediah heard them too. He froze, his head snapping toward the sound. Then he looked back at me, his expression torn between rage and resignation. For a moment, I thought he was going to finish it anyway, to bring that crowbar down and damn the consequences. But instead, he dropped it and ran, disappearing into the trees. I lay there for a few more seconds, my chest heaving, then forced myself to sit up. My whole body ached, and my hands were bleeding from where I'd scraped them on the frozen ground. But I was alive. I heard voices calling my name, and I shouted back, "Here! I'm here!" 2 state troopers appeared in the clearing, weapons drawn, their eyes scanning for threats. When they saw me, one of them holstered his weapon and knelt beside me. "Are you injured?" I shook my head. "I'm okay. He ran. Jedediah Pike, he went that way." I pointed in the direction Jedediah had fled. The troopers radioed for backup and took off into the woods after him. Another trooper stayed with me, helping me to my feet and escorting me back to the highway. My semi was still blocking both lanes, and a patrol car was parked behind it, lights flashing. The trooper helped me into the back of the patrol car and handed me a bottle of water. "They'll find him," the trooper said. "He can't have gotten far." I nodded, but I wasn't so sure. Jedediah knew these woods. He'd been operating out here for years, and if anyone could disappear into the wilderness, it was him. But for now, I was safe, and that was enough. They found Jedediah 2 hours later, trying to hotwire a car in a rest area 10 miles south of where we'd fought. He didn't resist when they arrested him. Just stood there, hands behind his back, staring at the ground as they read him his rights. I watched from the patrol car as they loaded him into the back of a cruiser and drove away. And for the first time in days, I felt like I could breathe again. The investigator called me that evening to tell me the news. Hobart Keene had been arrested as well, charged with multiple counts of robbery, assault, and conspiracy. They'd found evidence at his property linking him to at least 6 other incidents over the past 3 years. Victims who'd been run off the road, robbed, and sometimes worse. Russell and I weren't the only ones. We'd just been the lucky ones, the ones who got away. The trial took 8 months. I testified twice, once for Hobart Keene's case, once for Jedediah Pike's. Both times, I sat in that courtroom and recounted every detail of that February night, from finding Russell's truck in the ditch to the fight in the clearing. Russell testified too, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. The prosecution presented evidence, financial records, stolen goods recovered from Hobart's property, testimony from other victims who'd been too afraid to come forward until now. The defense tried to paint us as unreliable, as truckers with grudges against law enforcement, as men who'd misunderstood a routine traffic stop. But the evidence was overwhelming. Hobart Keene was convicted on 12 counts, including robbery, assault, and abuse of authority. He got 25 years. Jedediah Pike was convicted on 14 counts. He got 30. I should have felt vindicated, relieved, safe, but I didn't. I went back to work a week after the verdicts came down. Same routes, same highways, same stretches of US 95 through the Panhandle that I'd been driving for over a decade. My dispatcher asked if I wanted to switch to a different region, maybe haul loads through Montana or eastern Washington instead. I told her no, I wasn't going to let what happened change the way I lived my life. But it did change. I can't drive through that section of highway anymore without thinking about it. Every time I pass mile marker 187, I see Russell's truck in the ditch. Every time I see a county cruiser, I tense up, even though I know Hobart's locked away. Every time a tow truck pulls up behind me, Even in broad daylight with traffic all around, my heart rate spikes and I reach for my phone. The fear never really goes away. It just becomes part of the landscape, like the mountains and the forests and the snow. You learn to live with it. You have to. Because if you let it paralyze you, if you let it keep you off the road, then they've won. And I'm not going to give them that. I got a letter from Russell about 3 months after the trial. He'd moved to Oregon, taken a job with a construction company, left Idaho behind for good. He said he couldn't stand driving through the Panhandle anymore, couldn't shake the feeling that something was waiting for him around every corner. He said he was doing okay, all things considered, but that he still had nightmares. He thanked me again for saving his life. I never wrote back. Not because I didn't care, but because I didn't know what to say. How do you tell someone that you're still looking over your shoulder, that you still check your mirrors obsessively, that every shadow feels like a threat? You don't. You just keep driving. I heard through the grapevine that Hobart's appealing his conviction. His lawyers claiming procedural errors, insufficient evidence, coercion. It probably won't go anywhere, but the fact that he's trying, that he's still fighting, sits in the back of my mind like a splinter. What if he gets out? What if some technicality sets him free? What then? I try not to think about it. I focus on the road, on the loads, on the rhythm of the miles clicking past. I've started carrying a firearm now, something I swore I'd never do. It's locked in a case under my seat, registered and legal, and I've only taken it out once, to practice at a range near Coeur d'Alene. I hope I never have to use it, but I'm not taking chances anymore. The Panhandle's still beautiful. The mountains still rise up like ancient sentinels. The forests still stretch for miles in every direction. The snow still falls silent and perfect in the winter months. But I don't see it the way I used to. I see the places where someone could hide, the turnoffs where a cruiser could be waiting, the stretches of highway where help is too far away to matter. I keep driving because it's what I know. It's what I've always done. But every time I pull onto US 95, every time I head north toward Bonner's Ferry or south toward Lewiston, I feel it, that low-grade hum of anxiety, the awareness that something could go wrong at any moment, that the next set of headlights in my mirror could be someone with a badge and a plan, that the next breakdown could be the last one. I talked to the state police investigator, Garrett, a few weeks ago. He called to check in, see how I was holding up. I told him I was fine, which was only half true. He told me they'd closed the case, that Hobart and Jedediah weren't getting out any time soon, that I could rest easy. But then he said something that's stuck with me ever since. You did the right thing, Whitlock. You saved lives. But be careful out there. Because guys like Hobart and Jedediah, they're not unique. There are others. Different faces, different methods, but the same basic scam. Isolated highways, vulnerable travelers, people who won't be missed right away. It's been going on for decades, and it'll keep going on long after these two are gone. So keep your eyes open. Trust your instincts. And if something feels wrong, it probably is. I thanked him and hung up. And I've been thinking about those words every day since. How many others are out there? How many stretches of highway have their own Hobart Keene, their own Jedediah Pike? How many drivers have pulled over to help someone in distress, only to realize too late that they were the ones who needed help? I don't have answers. I just have the road, and the knowledge that every mile I drive could be the one where it all goes wrong again. So I stay vigilant. I vary my routes, I avoid stopping in isolated areas. I keep my phone charged and my gun close, and I keep driving, because that's what truckers do. We keep moving, even when we're scared. Even when the road feels like it's trying to kill us. Even when we know that somewhere out there, In the shadows of the Panhandle, someone might be waiting. I passed through that section of US 95 last week, the same stretch where I found Russell's truck, where this whole nightmare started. The snow was falling again, just like it had been that night. And for a moment I swear I saw a cruiser parked on the shoulder, lights off, just sitting there in the dark. I slowed down, my hands tightening on the wheel, my eyes locked on the rearview mirror. But when I looked back, the cruiser was gone. Maybe it was never there at all. Maybe it was just my mind playing tricks on me, the fear manifesting as something real. Or maybe it was a warning, a reminder that the road never forgets. And neither should I. I still drive the Panhandle. I still haul freight through those mountains, through those forests, through those long, lonely stretches where cell service disappears, and the only company you have is the hum of your engine and the thoughts in your head. But I'm not the same driver I was before that February night. I'm warier, harder, less willing to trust. And maybe that's what it takes to survive out here. Maybe you have to lose a little bit of yourself to the road before you can truly understand it. Before you can see it for what it really is. Not just asphalt and mile markers and rest stops, but a proving ground. A place where predators hunt and prey tries to survive. And sometimes, if you're lucky, you make it through to the other side. I've made it through. For now. But every time I climb into my cab, every time I fire up the engine and pull onto that highway, I wonder if this will be the trip where my luck runs out. Where I become another statistic, another missing trucker, another ghost haunting the Panhandle's endless miles. I hope not. But hope's a fragile thing out here. And the road doesn't care about hope. It only cares about what you're willing to do to survive. So I keep driving, and I keep watching, and I keep waiting for the moment when the headlights in my mirror become something more than just headlights. When the road I thought I knew becomes the road I should have feared all along.